Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joseph Attic, Executive Chairman of ID for Africa, and this is our 30th livecast. I'd like to warmly welcome you all and thank you for being with us for part 4 of the Mobile Identity Management Saga and for this important milestone. I also like to thank our development partners, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for their support, which has enabled us to produce thus far 30 high-quality episodes, all available as digital public goods for knowledge sharing and strategic capacity building in the service of development worldwide. The 3 episodes in the Mobile for ID4D saga have taken us on a very interesting journey and have galvanized the identity community around a topic that's at the heart of modernity. Together, we covered significant grounds and explored how mobile-enabled identity management is changing many government practices and is creating opportunities for accelerating digital transformation. While we do not have time right now to overview the long list of what we have learned thus far, let me, at a very high level, remind you of a few takeaways. One point which came out repeatedly throughout this series is the importance of private-public partnerships, such as those between the MNOs or the identity verification industry or the financial services providers on the one hand, and the identity authorities on the other. For the most part, these partnerships are helping the identity authorities expand their footprint by leveraging the much larger private infrastructure to accelerate enrollment. Those partnerships are also enabling new high-value services over mobile channels with lower transaction costs, which drives further demand for identity. So the lesson here for the identity authorities is that when it comes to developing the identity ecosystem, do not go at it alone. Instead, create meaningful partnerships with the other stakeholders and with the private sector with clearly defined roles and hold them accountable. One suggested model is the one where foundational identity authorities focus on scaling enrollment, whether outsourced or insourced, and providing attestation services for provisioning through narrowly defined identification APIs, while sectorial agencies and private sector focus on transactional verification of onboarded identity. We will have more to say about the guardrails for such PPPs in segment 4 of today's episode. In addition, the series highlighted the need to review and reform legal and regulatory frameworks to bring them in line with today's technological capabilities. Whether it is civil registration or civil identification, in many cases, we found that the full potential of mobile identity was hampered by outdated legal frameworks. Several times during the series, there were calls for regulatory sandboxes to allow for experimentation while the regulatory overall is being explored. We also identified several proven policies and practices, such as the verifiable linkage of SIM with NIN and the tokenization of the NIN via mobile apps. In addition, we saw how the convergence of mobile digital identity and a clear political will to achieve total financial inclusion are reshaping underlying economies. India's transformation through JAM is a case in point that was presented and merits to be examined clearly and emulated by countries in Africa. Now, on the technical side, we saw how mobile could change identity management and biometrics, first by enabling a more dynamic view of identity anchored on risk management. Second, we learned about new artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms that can match, at least for authentication, fingerprint slaps captured with a standard mobile phone camera. Add to that the familiar selfie authentication capability, and you have a multimodal biometric capture and matching device in the cell phone itself without external hardware. I should caution, though, that it is still an open question whether the captured prints can reach enrollment quality or can be used in large-scale deduplication. More benchmarking is needed, which is what NIST and the FBI are doing, as we learned in the previous episode. The industry is split on this issue. You could see it in that episode's chat. We intend to bring in the two opposing sides of this issue for a face-off at some point in season 5. So stay tuned. I cannot do this series justice in just a few moments. I can only reiterate that this is content worth watching and rewatching. This is why I urge you to check out what you have missed on our YouTube library. Please show your support for all this community effort, which has thus far produced 30 top-notch episodes and featured nearly 300 panelists and speakers from the global identity community. So share, like, and subscribe to the ID for Africa channel, please. This helps the movement continue to reach others by telling the Google algorithm this is content worth promoting. So thank you for your support. Today, we present the finale of the mobile ID saga in the following 4 exciting segments. I will start with a to-the-point piece with a veteran expert on identity about the status and outlook of mobile-driven digital transformation in Europe. We will then explore the drivers and the current trends and lessons learned from mobile identity adoption in advanced economies, followed by an in-depth feature on interoperable credentials such as digital travel documents, mobile driver's licenses, and regional identity. One development you will notice from these 3 segments is the emergence of the identity wallet, which is being recognized as the next logical step in the evolution of digital identity and is the pillar upon which mobile identity is deployed in interoperable and privacy-respecting manners. Finally, in segment 4, we will have the last word, an exceptional panel of 3 civil society actors to examine mobile risks and mitigation of the dark side, especially in the African context, where mobile adoption seems to be outpacing the legal guardrails. Before we start today's program, let me share the final live update about the AGM. All is going on track, but I have to give you a fair warning. We expect to close registration before May 15. If you plan to attend, you must register ASAP. Please do not wait till the last minute. No late registration can be accommodated, unfortunately. In addition, those who have registered, you need to select your workshops immediately. Workshop selection for contributors will close May 6. After that date, anyone who registers will be moved into observer status only. So please act now and select your workshop. As for the livecast, I am pleased to say that the identification arena on day 1 of the AGM will be simultaneously broadcast as a livecast directly from the conference venue. Stay tuned for more details about the segments and for a surprise special guest who will join me for the kickoff of that panel. For those unable to physically be with us at the AGM, watch out for the registration link coming up in late May for that livecast episode number 31. We will also have 2 summation livecasts, June 28th and 30th, to summarize and discuss the recommendations that will come out of the 4 workshops. After that, we will see you in a brand new season 5 starting September 28th. Now we're ready to start part 4 of the mobile ID saga. The lineup today features the following contributors in the order of appearance. Dr. Detlef Houdeau, Senior Director, Business Development, Infineon Technologies. Einārs Leps, Sales Manager, X-Infotech. Hannes Krause, Business Analyst, Digital Identity Technologies, Cybernetica. Marie-Sophie Bellot, Marketing Manager, Digital ID, Public Security and Identity, Idemia. Michael Edwards, Director, Product and Solutions Management, Veridos. Mark Sullivan, Manager, Digital Service Group, Canadian Banknote. Crystal Terras, Chair, Digital ID Working Group, Secure Identity Alliance. Nolwazi Hlophe, Deputy Director, Financial Regulation and Supervision, Digital Frontiers. Solomon Okedara, co-founder, Digital Rights Lawyers Initiative, and Teki Falconer, founder and executive director of Africa Digital Rights Hub. Thank you to all the panelists for being with us. We truly appreciate your valuable contributions to this livecast, and I look forward to engaging with each of you within the different segments. Now, we are ready to start the first segment, To the Point with Detlef Houdeau. Operator, please prepare the segment. Detlef, again, welcome to this livecast, and thank you for being with us. We really appreciate it. It seems like something big is happening in Europe. 2 months ago, the EU issued a call for proposals for pilot projects under the Digital Europe program. What is this RFP, and where do you see mobile fitting in it?
Yeah, first of all, many thanks for the invitation. Second point regarding your answer, your question. We have recognized that the European Commission in some cases needs so-called feasibility studies to be carried out before they start any kind of new regulation. I would explain this in 2 examples from the past. One was the so-called large-scale pilot on Stork, which is an European program on connectivity and usage of different national existing ID schemes. And this must be working across members. What is the reason behind? We have today more than 17 million citizens in Europe which are living outside their country of birth. And with this, you need this kind of interoperability cross-border. So this project was finished in 2011. Then the European Commission have recognized, besides the identity management, we have also healthcare data cross-border. If you go to ski in Austria as a German citizen and you have some incidents, you go to the hospital, and with this, you share health information cross-border. This was Stork 2, finished in 2012. 2 years later, the European Commission have published this European regulation on electronic identification and trust service, in short, eIDAS regulation, and this was placed in this case. So 6 years later, the European Commission start a public consultation to look for drivers and barriers on new regulation, which is normal in this case, that you recall, is anything proper running or did you need any kind of modification? And 2021, last year, they have published the first draft on eIDAS 2. And on this, they need also a kind of feasibility study. And based on this, they have called this request for project with a budget of 58 million euro. This is the next logical step. But this gives you the answer, what's the history and where we are staying today.
So this is a natural progression towards digital identity, interoperable digital identity. And how does mobile fit into this? I mean, obviously, it is an enabler, but is mobile called out explicitly?
The mobile topic is one of the central new aspects in this regulation, which is very important. And this pilot phase, what we have mentioned before, which will start next year, can show to the European Commission and to the member states what kind of best practice we can see in this domain, what is the usability and the acceptance by the citizen on this technology, what are the security cornerstones and the privacy concerns in this domain, and at the end, what kind of use cases for the daily life in the private and in the public domain are important. And this is, from my point of view, one of the key learnings of this next level of program in this case. And some side effects are, you must look which technology can support this, which international standards can be used or needs to be used. What's about interoperability cross-border? And at the end, what kind of harmonization you can have across 27 member states. So these are, you see, a lot of topics, and this gives you also the flavor how complex this area is today.
But the RFP is not asking for a very specific development to be delivered. It's basically experimentation, pilot, exactly. And anybody could bid for this. Let's talk a little bit about the timelines and understand who can actually participate in the.
First of all, there's a description that the identity issuer must be a public authority. That means at the end that public authority must participate on this European pilot phase. It's not possible that only some industries create a proposal, send this to the Commission. This will be not accepted.
Okay.
This is one of the key cornerstones. The second is, since September last year, Joseph, we have this European ad hoc expert group collected by member states authorities, organized by ENISA, which creates so-called a toolbox. Nobody knows how many tools are in the box, what's at the end the final framework, but this is very important to give this as a kind of guideline for the pilot phase. First, to define some tools in a box and then to start the pilot. This is very important. This document will be published or finalized from the current schedule by September this year.
Okay.
So it's planned that the general agreement with the winner of this new call for proposal gets a agreement signed by December this year. That means,
do you expect one winner, or will there be
no.
multiple?
They request 3 different groups.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have also some horses in the game. It's not one. Yeah, you have different. With this, you share also some knowledge and you see more results. Very important. So, and this pilot is also scheduled for 2 years. That means we are running starting 2023, maybe January, February, March. And then you have end 2 years later. So this gives you some cornerstones, and after the pilot are analyzed and the European Commission gets some key feedback, I would expect that the IDAS 2 regulation comes down the street.
So IDAS 2 will come after they've got enough experience with these pilots. And where will the wallet, the one that we've heard a lot about, the European wallet, will be part of the pilots that
Yes. It's a core. One of the core elements. One
of the calls is the European wallet. Okay. Now, it seems that the European wallet is coming into an environment that's not really a green field. I mean, Europe has had 15 years worth of regulations and that build one on top of the other. You mentioned a few of them. Could you sort of guide us through sort of the landscape of the regulations, and also guide us through sort of where does mobile fit and where does mobile adoption, which is not yet harmonized in Europe, but still national level, mobile adoption is taking place?
Yes, I have created some visuals as a big picture. Maybe we can jump on the first table to get the big picture. You see on the left side the European regulation, in the middle the date of the enrollment, and on the right side some topics regarding the scope. Very important, you see we have now the regulation on 3 different travel document generation. Generation first was starting 2006, generation 2, 2009, and generation 3, 2013. The last one has the highest security, captured 2 biometric data, face and 2 fingerprints, and is now the current travel document at the European level. Then you see in May 29, the European Commission have made some justification because some details were not properly defined. For example, the minimum age of the holder, the security feature of the documents. And based on this, they have created a second European regulation on this. The third one, very important, June 2019, address that all national ID cards must have also travel document data captured in the document. The deadline was October 2021. That means all 27 member states must have the biometric data, the ICAO standard, and the European regulation and the national identity program in rollout. Some countries have met this deadline, for example, France. Last year, they have started to roll out. Some other countries, for example, Greece, are behind this scheme, behind this deadline. So we have also different speed in the member state level. If we can go to the next slide, then we go to the Einārs topic, which is more of interest for today. You see the target on Einārs on the single European digital market was more trust, more convenience, and more business across member states, and addressing 510 million plus citizens in Europe in all member states. Cross-border authentication is the main scope of this program. That means Spanish people living in Italy can use the Spanish identity card for government services. This is the example for the Einārs. The pre-work was Stock 1, as mentioned before. Stock 2, the PEPOL for electronic signature, the EPSOS for healthcare, and you see some other projects funded with more than 100 million euro along these pilots. Then you see this was published, the regulation, in July 2014. And then we see the so-called rollout of national notification. The first country in Europe was Germany in 2017. 2018, you see Spain, Estonia, Italy, Luxembourg, Croatia has followed. 2020, we have 15 member states. Today, Austrian government had notified the ID scheme in Austria on a level high. So this storyline, you can say, is ongoing. Mm-hmm. And we have also some Einārs token specification published, for example, at the German Federal Office for Security and the Information System called DSI. Very important to get this as a big picture. Maybe we can go to the next table, which gives an answer regarding how we are touching greenfield with mobile ID, and the answer is no. You see in this table on the left side the countries, the next column which name these mobile ID projects have, then some technical and security aspects. Sorry for these acronyms, but to explain this is more complicated. Then you see the usage and the penetration rate. And you see also on the right side different rollout calendar years, which show you also that we have different speeds. Maybe we can go to the next slide, which show you another part of the countries like Austria, like Sweden, like Finland, Norway, Slovenia, Luxembourg, and Spain. And these are in one outcome of the analyzing step of the European Commission, DG Connect, H4, which show you that we have different programs, different technologies, different standards, and different timelines in member states level. And you see also that big countries like France and Germany are missing.
Right.
Those countries have made some pilots as far as we know, for example, Optimus 1 and Optimus 2 in Germany, but no rollout at this time. So you see also very important that we have such kind of programs, rollouts running. Interoperability is missing, and some big players in numbers of citizens like Poland, like Germany, like France are missing in this view.
Right. So let's analyze a little bit what you just gave us. I mean, clearly, mobile identity is already happening in Europe, but it doesn't look to me like it is harmonized at all. And it doesn't look like everybody's doing it at the same speed. So is it fair to say that the European Mobile Wallet Initiative is Europe's attempt to do this harmonization?
I would expect that we must looking for 3 different pillars in this context. Number one, we must look the outcome of the so-called ad hoc expert group from the member states level and what they describe as a toolbox. Yeah. How broad is the toolbox? How many version of tools they have? What kind of interpretation would be possible? Second, we must look on the pilot phase with different member states involvement, with different use cases and different domains. You mentioned at the beginning, healthcare is one topic in this area, health data. So this is not only between the family doctor and the hospital, it's also a cross-border topic. And last but not least, we have today the IDAS 2 regulation proposal on the table, but missing is the Implementation Act, which must describe much more details. And all these 3 topics, the ad hoc working group outcome, the pilot outcome, the learnings, and at the end, the Implementation Act can give the view if European member states goes into harmonization, into European harmonized systems, or did we have a fragmentation in the future?
Okay, so what do you think is the timeline before we would see the Implementation Act IDAS 2?
I would expect this by 2024, 2025.
2024, that late? Okay, but in the meantime, we're going to continue. Actually, maybe.
But Joseph, you must keep in mind the outcome of the pilots are very essential
to determine what it looks like.
To learn on those topics. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, perhaps you can give us a very quick overview of how the European wallet is expected to work. We're going to use that in the rest of the discussion today. So if you don't mind, help us understand that quickly.
I prepared also some high-level visuals. Maybe you can go to this part. The first is very high level, shows you on the left side that we have different verified credentials on the smartphone called VCs for different purposes. On the bottom, you see we can have different factor for authentication. Could be a PIN, could be face recognition from the camera in the smartphone, could be the fingerprints. You have this multi-factor authentication proposal, you can say. Maybe we can go to the next slide, very high level. Very important that we have different stakeholder in this area. You see in the middle, the user. You see on top, the identity provider. We have this since the IDAS 1 in many countries in business models working. We have the service provider. Could be transport, could be health, could be any kind of services. And you see also, we call this attribute provider, could be another stakeholder group. So these are the involved parties for the, let me say, simplification of the ecosystem. On the left bottom side, you see 2 other. One is the device manufacturer who make smartphones, included security elements, include SIM card, embedded, and so on. And then you have the so-called mobile network operator in the member states level. This gives you the view that we have different stakeholders in this ID wallet, more complexity than in the national identity world, where we have a clear issuer, that's the government, municipality, and a clear user, the citizen. In this case, we are talking on much more stakeholders, and this give also a little bit the view that the complexity would be increased, not only in technology, but also who's participating on this, which business model is behind this, what kind of security, and so on. And this is extremely important to get this as a big picture. Last page, maybe we can move to the next one, to explain that this proposal can capture different verified credentials could be used in enterprise because it's an industry 4.0. So if big companies say this can be used as an access token to get access to buildings, to factories, this could be happen because we talk in this case on 5G and 6G campus network. We can use this in the social security area or pension security area where we get other credentials, and we can at the end also use this for payment networks. So you see on this picture, the application can be very broad, addressed with this technology in general. But keep in mind, we have here also different user, industry, enterprise, social services, government, and payment is the finance sector. So this gives you the opportunity to bring this into different domains on the one side. On the other side, we have also many new stakeholders in this game.
Yeah, actually, Detlef, thank you for that. This seems to be one of the biggest developments in the domain of identity since I've been in it for the last 30 years. This seems to be basically infrastructure of its sort of most extensive way. I mean, what do you feel? Have you gotten it right finally?
On one hand side, I see the chance to bring a kind of digital twin, not only for industry, also for citizen into the European game. So this is a big opportunity. And in the past, we have seen last 100 years, physical identities and the real world need some documents, visible documents. In the digital world, we need the digital identity, and this wallet concept have the potential to bring this vision into life. Yeah. And this is very, very important. However, Joseph, at this moment, a lot of things are in discussion and not clear and not really finalized regarding what is the answer. For example, what is the handling of minor people and disabled persons, if they cannot use it as normal? Right. What's about lost and stolen of smartphones? If you have your credential on this. What's about if you have more than one smartphone in your pocket, one for business and one for private? How you handle this topic? Which technologies and which standards at the end are used? And regulation lifetime and standards lifetime normally are not synchronized. Right. Have different lifetime, you can say. And finally, it's not clear, is security certification needed? In the national identity cards, we know common criteria, it's the common sense framework. You need EAL 5+ for the hardware, you need 4+ for the application software. This must be reassessed from time to time, sometimes every year in some member states. So on this, we have a clear framework. The question is, what is the certification framework in the mobile ID wallet in the future at the European Commission? So you see a lot of open questions, not finalized. Opportunity, potential, yes, but also some unclear topics at this moment.
Yeah, I think it's certainly going to keep the identity community very, very busy for the next 4 or 5 years, because this is it. This is the end game. If you build that infrastructure and that becomes a model for the world to follow, this is definitely a worthy target to go after. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. And Detlef, thank you so much for being with us. I really enjoyed talking to you. And since this is going to be a topic that is going to continue to evolve, perhaps we'll bring you back on in the future to give us periodic updates. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. We're now ready for segment 2, which is about the drivers of mobile identity in advanced economies. In this segment, we're going to build on the discussion we just had with Detlef as we turn our attention to the enabling environment of mobile identity and the drivers of the advanced economies. I'm pleased to have with me today for this segment 3 experts who have significant experience with the deployment of mobile identity in various forms within Europe and beyond to talk to us about these issues. The segment should provide us with a view of what comes next in mobile identity as countries continue to advance their digital identity ecosystems. Let me welcome Einārs Leps from X-Infotech from Latvia, Hannes Krause, Cybernetica, Estonia, Marie-Sophie Bellot from Idemia, France. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being with us in this panel. Yes, Marie-Sophie, she is here. Okay, I want to start this segment by establishing your mobile experience. So I'd like you to please introduce yourselves briefly and explain in what economies or countries have you deployed mobile identity. I'm going to start with Marie-Sophie, then Einārs, and then Hannes. Okay, Marie-Sophie, please.
Fantastic. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm very pleased to be here with you today. So Marie-Sophie Bellot, I'm working as marketing and strategic manager for the digital identity market at Idemia. Few words, so our role at Idemia is to support governments in defining and implementing the right digital identity scheme that is tailored to their needs. Each country is different in terms of geography, in terms of equipment, in terms of digital readiness globally, and they do require a tailored approach to digital ID. So we do provide human expertise and technological solutions to enable to leverage what is called the root of trust, the most trustable source of information related to civil identity, and issue, based on that, a digital ID that can, depending on the environment, either store in a system, an electronic identity document, or in a device, and this is the so-called mobile ID wallet that we'll be talking about. Regarding the experiences, we have deployed the Aadhaar program in India that gathers over 1.2 billion of people that is managed through our system. The mobile ID wallet is today deployed in several states in United States and under the form of mobile driving license. And it's also deployed in Colombia and Chile. And this is actually linked, correlate with the national identity card. And we are also working with the French government in Europe in their national digital identity program to enable citizens to leverage these newly introduced electronic identity documents to perform online authentication.
Thanks, Marie-Sophie. Einārs?
So thank you very much, Dr. Attic, for the floor. I'm delighted to be part of such a distinguished panel, and I have to say that also a bit grieved since this is the last of the 4 live casts dedicated to mobile identity. So I've been part of X-Infotech team for the past 4 years as regional sales executive, and before joining the company, I worked in multiple positions within the Latvian Ministry of Defense, mostly cyber security related matters. So I've had the luck to be part of both the decision-making process and the business side. Our company has been delivering different identity projects around the globe in more than 60 countries. The more recent one regarding mobile identity was an eKYC project for NCBA Bank in Kenya. Nevertheless, we see that the mobile identity in the shape and extent that we are discussing today will be an absolute turning point. And I believe that all 3 companies that are represented in this panel are thrilled to be part of the process. We are at the point of switching from physical to digital, and I'm sure that this is the bell epoch of the mobile identity. So when the COVID started, we saw a much growing demand for mobile solutions, for services, including governmental ones, accessible via mobile. And we started to expand our portfolio to address this demand. But what we see today is that the demand from the public vis-a-vis the government for a more mobile-based identity will result in what we see today, for example, in Ukraine, full-scale mobile identity.
We'll come back to that, Einārs. We'll come back to that. I just want just a little bit overview of your experience. So we'll come back to the analysis of that.
Of course. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Hannes?
Yes, good afternoon, Joseph, and thanks for having me. And My name is Hannes. I'm working in Cybernetica as a business analyst in digital identity, and I have a governmental background as well as my colleague from Latvia, whom I actually remember from my old times. I'm working in Cybernetica, and we are the technology company providing technology for different digital components in digital societies. And in Africa, we are most known for X-Road, which is the backbone of any working digital society, and which has been deployed now in more than 20 countries. And after, besides X-Road, and why this is important is that together with a working digital identity, a seamless data exchange is something that actually enables any sort of service. In digital identity, though, Cybernetica is most proud of our achievements in the Baltic and Icelandic market, because our technology, split key, is actually the basis of the fastest growing digital identity solution in the Baltic states. And although maybe small in numbers in terms of citizens, this market is really intensive in transactions made by digital identities. Thanks.
Okay, so I mean, it's clear that among the three of you, you're highly qualified and experienced in mobile and digital identity. So I'm pleased to be in discussion with the three of you. I want to start by sort of doing a contrast. So far, we have spoken in the first three episodes mostly on mobile in the context of developing economies. Now we've changed to examine mobile in advanced economies, and the question I have for the panel, and then anybody on the panel could lead, and then we can have a dialogue on it. What really changes when you go and look at the market and when you look at the environment in a developed country or in an advanced economy versus a developing world? So anybody would like to take the lead on that? Just be brief, and then somebody else could add in that discussion. So we want to do this as essentially a round robin.
I can start.
Yes, Marie-Sophie.
According to me, the main difference is that in most advanced economies, a mobile ID goes beyond a single tool to authenticate a citizen or a user. We are looking for real citizen experiences with the ability to derive multiple identity documents from your national identity card, your passport, driving license, health document, all these kind of elements, alongside with other identity-related attributes, with proof of residence, your diploma. It's all this ecosystem of attributes that you are now able to derive into your mobile ID wallet. So in a sense, it's a way to reduce silos between the different market verticals with health, finance, all these kind of elements, and really focus on your core identity with multiple attributes that you can then share with different identity providers or different service providers.
Why is that not an objective in the developing context as well? Is it just that the infrastructure and the maturity of the credentials is not there? And that, I mean, I want to know the difference. Why is it possible for you to dream in this developed context while you cannot do it in a developing context?
I think it's a goal, and it's an objective for everyone. What is important with this kind of element and what is required is interoperability between all the different systems. And this is what Europe is trying to build. And we know that it takes time. We are talking earlier to 2024, 2025. Yes, we will have to wait some time in order to have this multitude of identity attributes that we'll be able to exchange with different service providers. But it will take time, but it needs a large organization globally at top level in order to be able to benefit from it.
I understand. So we need a body at a multinational level that can coordinate and can drive. This is not a trivial thing to arrive at. Europe has a body. It's the European Commission. The European Union has been driven by a vision that needs some action. Okay, Marie-Sophie, hold on to that. Anyone else could give me another aspect that's different in the developed context?
I think I think if you choose the next generation technologies for option, then options also open in Africa, and also not maybe just by getting like without getting stuck into this question of do we have the overarching regulatory framework as we have in EU. So I would add that.
Okay. Einārs, what do you see? What do you see the differences, and maybe we can talk about what's driving adoption in the developed versus the developing, which is not generating as much demand?
Well, of course, there are a lot of differences, but think about the similarities as well. So if you look at it from the age perspective, think about the Generation Z. Those are people who are currently teenagers or in their early 20s. I think there is not much difference in terms of perception of the mobile services. Online streaming services, online shops, social media platforms, all of them have basically accustomed users to a certain quality of user experience. No matter if the user is from advanced economy or not. What I'm trying to say is that the potential of mobile identity in advanced economies is to address the same challenges as in developing ones. How to engage younger generations, how to enable remote services, and how to save resources that are typically spent when mobile identity is absent, so time and money. I'm sure that the demand for complete switch from physical to digital will be equally heavy among developing and developed parts of the world.
And Marie-Sophie, do you think the fact that in developed economies, the majority of people carry smartphones instead of feature phones plays an important role in accelerating the embracing of the mobile identity?
This is a point to be taken into account, but there are also several alternatives that can be put in place in the different environments in order to ensure adoption and usage of digital identity, depending of the country, each another. So I think at the end of the day, the goal is for everyone to benefit from a digital ID, okay, owner of these identity attributes, and share them with service providers.
Okay, Hannes, do you think the experience that Europe had with the COVID and the vaccination pass, has it helped the general public understand better the potential of mobile identity? Because I see people going to restaurants and they're actually presenting their credentials on the mobile pass, and it's kind of a reflex that's become natural. To what extent this has played a role?
When I look at my own home market and the markets where we are most achieved in Cybernetica, I would say that this thing was already in place before COVID. But I think what COVID also has changed in Europe is that the European political class has sort of got this understanding as well. So I think citizens are already, but this current new development has also taken this understanding to the European political class.
Okay, so basically, COVID created more awareness about the potential for identity management in a seamless mobile context. Okay, so that's a positive thing. Einārs, do you think there's also been a more pragmatic, risk-based sort of approach to managing identity? I mean, mobile allows us to transact. We can transact in something that's as small as €5, as big as 5,000 euros or whatever, and we're living it. I mean, we have the contactless card experience and etc. When the limits are different, has this kind of finally gotten us to understand that identity is not absolute and that risk has to be put into it?
I think that from user perspective, absolutely. I truly believe that a lot of people don't really understand why can they trust money to the mobile and they cannot trust identity to the mobile. Why they still need to carry some physical documents around. for a lot of people, the first part is actually more important than the second one. Thinking about security, again, a lot of people, the general public, I don't think they're much into details about what is the security mechanism behind. But remember, I think it was in the second live cast, there was this example about trustworthy and worthy to trust.
Yes.
And that's the thing about governments, right? They are trustworthy because they are supposed to be. And if you as a user can trust your money to a private bank, you should be able to trust your identity to your government.
Okay, we're gonna sort of get deeper and deeper into this topic, but I want to go back to Marie-Sophie and ask to focus on a little bit more about the regulatory framework. About 8 years ago, the IDIS regulation was adopted, version 2, as we've heard from the discussion with Detlef, is currently under discussion and is closely tied to the European Digital ID Initiative, which we just discussed. Can you help us understand what is really EIDIS, and to what extent this is the kind of enabling regulatory environment that we need to ensure the healthy emergence of a digital and mobile ecosystem, focusing more on mobile ecosystem? What did we learn in 8 years so far from having a regulation like this?
Sure. So let me start with a few words on EIDAS. EIDAS, it's a European regulation, standing for Electronic Identification, Authentication, and Trust Services. Basically, you have to perceive it as a cooperation mechanism between all the member states that aim to establish interoperability from the different systems that are set up by the member states. So as it was said in 2014, the current version of the EIDAS regulation has been published for the mutual recognition of qualified signature. And in 2018, it's the EID part that entered into force with the recognition of what is called notified EID scheme. This notion is very important. How does it work? It's a country that goes to the Commission requesting his scheme to be notified at a certain level of security. And when his scheme is certified, then it enables all the other member states to recognize this identity as secure enough for the citizen to access their services. All along 2020, the European Commission has been working with industries, with governments, in order to assess what has been put in place, identify the potential room for improvements, and they've issued a report. Within this report, they've identified some challenges. The first one is the coverage limitation issues. Only 15 member states have been notifying their schemes that represent less than 60% of the European population. There are also some issues related to the adoption, because the use of the EIDAS, or the coverage of the first generation of the regulation, if I could say so, was limited to the public sectors.
Yeah.
Lack of private sector's involvement that naturally limits the adoption. Another point is a strong fragmentation across the member state, with different type of security of implementation and security requirements, with authentication factors going from one type password to a card-based authentication. So it is based on these findings that the European Commission has published the draft for the EIDAS second generation, that is mainly based on 3 pillars. The first one is to make sure that all digital identity schemes are notified. So the draft mandates every member state in Europe to create a digital ID to their citizens and to notify their scheme to Brussels. Second one is to introduce a digital ID wallet that is based on the mobile phone and that enables citizens to store their identity attributes and share them with their consent to different service providers. And third one is to involve the private sectors. The regulation mandates that private sector service providers, private related service providers are involved within this new scheme.
I mean, this is tremendous. I mean, really to see that now every country is obligated to issue basically digital identity on a mobile identity wallet and to make it available to their citizens and involve the private sector. I mean, that to me is going to create a revolution in the way the adoption and the innovation landscape in Europe is going to be.
And this is what the pilots that we were talking about earlier
right.
are so important in order to ensure that in few years, all the member states will be able to issue the right mobile ID wallet.
Exactly. Okay, hold on to this thought. I want to go to Hannes and then Einārs and talk about not the future, but talk about today. I'd like you to speak about the status of mobile adoption in Latvia and in Estonia. I'm in France, and I know that the foundational identity is not on mobile yet, so I will not ask Marie-Sophie that question. So please, and also while at it, explain if your countries needed country-specific regulations beyond the IDES regulations to enable mobile identity in your country. So Hannes, can start with you.
Yes, thank you. And well, in our market or in the Baltic market, you know, what we have established is a principle that the user comfort or user convenience is at the center of the thing, and we have seen some pretty good results out of that, because I guess Einārs will talk about Latvia later on because he's a native there, but I know that in Latvia every second person is pretty much using the ID solution Smart ID, which is based on our technology. So probably the reason for that is not just the fact that, you know, we have many services that you can use that and more services in Estonia than in Latvia, but also the fact that the thing has to be really convenient to use. For example, I'm joining you from Mauritius at the moment, and you know I had to have a new you know, Smart ID account created while being here, and it was enabled to me, you know, without actually visiting any Estonian government official and without actually, you know, showing my passport. I had done it earlier, you know, in the earlier stage, but once you are already there, you can do it really conveniently. But over to Einārs side.
So what would you say in Estonia is the rate of adoption of a mobile ID, that people go around just with their mobile phone, their ID on their mobile phone?
Well, I think really that the question really is like whether you define mobile ID as the thing that is based on SIM card, or whether it's a completely smart app. Well, I think it's pretty much the majority of any digital service users are actually using it. Is it either the SIM card based or the smart app based?
Smart. Okay, hold on. Let me bring Einārs to that. Let's compare and contrast Latvia and Estonia in terms of, maybe they're the same. Where are you with the mobile penetration in your country?
Well, I believe that both Latvians and Estonians are in quite a similar situation, and the reason for that is not only our proximity and us being neighbors, but also our similarities in the banking area. So historically, the mobile identity has been driven by banks. It is still far more popular to use the banks issued verification tools for accessing public services online than to use the one issued by the government. On top of that, the society here is heavily spoiled regarding using mobile identity to access online services, whether it is to apply for your annual car technical check, to submit tax report, access your blood test results, or even submit an application to the police if your bike has been stolen. And the government here is showing a good example. All communication between the government institution is done now electronically using electronic signature. So they are leading by an example. As I mentioned, our government has also issued trusted identity to access state services online. And in fact, if you want to use the full extent, you have to use the government ones. For example, if you want to access the the electronic address where all the official communication between you and the government takes place. You have to use the government ones.
Okay, and actually, sorry, just finish this point before I move on to another point for you.
No. I mean, we see that as Hannes mentioned previously, what is that you mean when you are saying mobile identity, right? And there are different extents to which you can move the level of your mobile identity. So yes, you can authorize yourself. You can verify your identity. You can authorize transactions, sign documents digitally. But we are, of course, still not yet there to introduce full mobile ID. And hopefully, as Dr. Detlef already covered, hopefully the EU initiative will bring some good results in this field.
Just very quickly, Hannes, can you explain how the provisioning of identity, mobile identity works? I mean, do you first go through digital identity that's on a physical support and then go through NFC, or can you provision directly to a mobile without ever going through? Please explain how it works in Estonia.
Basically, we have actually different opportunities for that, but what is really key thing for us is that the source of trust has to be a working national identity system, be it like a population register, etc. In the African context. But in Estonia, of course, you just you at first, of course, you have to identify yourself either in the office if you want to get the SIM card based mobile identity, or in case of smart ID, you have to authenticate yourself together with a working and valid document. And then you can use biometric capturing system on top of that, for example.
Okay. And I get the option if I want to have my ID on a SIM versus on an app, and I can have both. I can move from one to the other. How does that work?
Yeah, it works. I mean, I have all of them.
You have all of them,
for example. Okay. But I mean, definitely the smart app based version is the most comfortable one, because this is just completely evident. And if you are traveling in Africa, then there is also an element of cost that you can avoid by using it if you have a thing that is completely in your smart app.
In your smart app and the Wi-Fi. Actually, just Einārs, once you told me that you think that mobile identity is driven by the TikTok generation. Can you elaborate on this? You said these people have 30-second attention spans and they have user expectations, and we have to cater to them, and that's forcing government. So what do you mean by that?
Well, absolutely. That's a good example, and I truly believe that this is the generation we will have to tackle the most, because those are the boys and girls who the government will be the hardest ones to convince that they have to go stand in lines. Even if you're talking about voting, right? If you have to stand in lines, fill out some paper, throw it in the box, for them, this will be a much harder task. And if I may bring the example about elections, since my colleague is from Estonia, this is a very good example, because elections is what pretty much legitimizes any government, right? I can show you an example. Both Latvia and Estonia had municipal elections in 2021. The outcome in Latvia was that 34% of the registered voters participated. In Estonia, it was 54%, so it's 20% more. You can guess which country of these two has e-voting in place, okay? 46% of all voters who voted in Estonia voted online. So if you want to engage your younger generation, if you want them to be part of the governmental process, of state processes, you have to tackle them. You have to talk about full-scale e-government.
So mobile for TikTok. So we need to understand that. Okay, great. Hold on to that. I want to ask both Marie-Sophie and Hannes, but Hannes, I'd like you. We just learned that convenience is a big driver. I mean, people are going onto the mobile phone because it's very convenient. It lowers the barriers, and it leads to higher participation in society, higher participation perhaps in the democratic process, e-government, etc. But there are consequences. When we make things way too convenient, there are two issues that might come and that could be problematic. One, I'd like Hannes to address, which is the security. Are we opening the door to making life easier for hackers? And then after that, Marie-Sophie, I want you to explain, are we giving up our privacy by going through platforms that seduce us through their convenience? So we'll first hear about security, and then we'll hear about consent management and the protection of privacy. So Hannes?
Yeah, thank you. I think, Joseph, I heard in your question a bit of a false premise, because I think,
yes,
I think in this world and in the future that is waiting for us, you don't have to sacrifice security just for convenience.
Now that sounds like a marketing
experience. Our experience shows that, because how we and how our company has ended up with the technology that we are proud of. It was started with a research that was commissioned in 2014, and the central question of the research was that how can we actually create more user adoption, and how can we create a more convenient platform? And then after 3 years of research, we ended up with a completely software-based, identity technology that we can use just without any additional tokens.
Right, but that means you have to find solutions that are frictionless. If you ask me to secure things by giving my face, my iris, my PIN, my voice, clearly I will not subscribe. So to me, make it convenient, but if you want to secure it, tell me what can you do behind the scenes to secure it without putting friction for me.
Well, we are believers in the fact that if you work and research enough on a technology, then you can end up with a convenient solution. And this is just our example. But the same goes for privacy. But I think this question was more to Sophie.
But what? Yes, but what would it be? You would feel that sort of secure element exploitation on the cell phone, using encryption to make sure that there are no sessions that can happen without any data being encrypted. I mean,
well, of course. Sorry to intervene, but well, of course, the here in Estonia, at least in our country's experience, the fact that that the trust is based on the national identity system that is working, and the second bit, I think, is that you just well, I would put it this way, that the EU framework that we have in place, if you know that although something is very convenient, but if you know that you can give qualified handwritten signatures, basically equal level to handwritten signatures, is something, and that is also compliant with the EU framework, then I think, what else can you do?
Okay, so
and we see the result,
Okay, so yeah. It doesn't keep you up at night worrying about the security of the ID platform more and more being relied on. You don't worry about it. You sleep well at night.
Well, yeah, definitely.
Okay, we'll come back to that subject one day when there is a big hack that happens. But for now, I want to go to Marie-Sophie and understand, what do we give people the power in their hands to do privacy and consent management? How do we do this?
Basically, today, in the wide range of digital identity solutions that you can see on the market, there are some of them that enable the user to be owner of its identity. For example, the mobile ID wallet, you locally store your identity attributes within your smartphone. You are also able to know for governments to be transparent about the management of their data, and enable citizen and system to be compliant with regulations such as RGPD, for example. You have also a mobile ID wallet on itself also open new opportunities, such as consent-based management, meaning that the user is requested to actively consent to share his identity attributes prior to the authentication process. This is the first way to manage it. There is also another opportunity, is what is called the selective attribute sharing. When you want to prove, for example, that you are over a certain age limit, you are able to select the related identity attributes regarding your age, for example, and only prove that you are over this age limit without sharing your name or your last name of anything like this.
So the magic word or the magic phrase is the wallet, is the digital wallet. That is the mechanism that allows us to maintain privacy and control. Is that correct?
It's one way to perform it. There are some other way to authenticate user without a wallet, when you can implement also consent-based management. For example, if you just have to authenticate yourself with your eID card without having a developed wallet within your smartphone, you can also implement consent-based management processes.
Okay, but in a way, if I'm a betting man, I would bet that in the future looks more like a wallet because a lot of momentum is behind it.
Yes, and this is what we discussed earlier regarding the fact that we are looking to reduce silo between the different market verticals, that we want to manage all identity attributes in the same area.
Okay, all right. In the remaining minutes that we have, I want to ask two questions, and those are free for all questions. And I'd like to ask, anybody could answer. Basically, in a world where we're moving more and more digital, especially over the mobile platforms, are we predicting the death of the physical credential? And anybody would like to take a crack at this, especially Hannes or Einārs? Yes,
I would predict it because and not just like the physical token, yes, but not the fact that everything has to be rooted in a workable identity scheme. Right. So Einārs, what do you think? Do you think we do not need anymore these physical credentials?
Well, I will use this opportunity and actually object my Estonian colleague. I don't think we will see that of physical credentials for multiple reasons. The first one is the governments. I don't think the governments will trust the internet on 100%. With all the conversations we have had with the customers about this topic, we repeatedly hear the same question. And what if internet goes down? So I think that to some extent, the digital identity will be our part of our lives in the near future and bring us to a point where the physical document will be just stacking up a pile of dust on your shelf. But no, I don't think that in near future we will cancel the document in its physical way. Okay.
What do you think, Marie-Sophie?
I definitely think that both will cohabit and are complementary. Today, inclusion for all citizens in the economical, in the political life is crucial. So identity is needed, materialized or dematerialized, and both are complementary. And even within the digital identity market, an identity document is today positioned as a root of trust, anchor of confidence to be leveraged to onboard citizens within their digital identity journey. That's the case in Colombia, that will be the case in Chile, in some of these countries. And the identity documents can also serve as a strong authentication factors, as a proof of possession for certain critical use cases, also for citizens. So I definitely think that they will have their place in the futures.
In fact, while I would love to agree with Hannes on this issue, because I love to live in a world which is completely dematerialized, I have to also say that I have insecurities about completely dematerialized. I tell you the example of the COVID pass, COVID credentials. I have no control. What I find is that sometimes they update the application, they revoke my pass, etc. And I find myself always going to the receipt, to the physical thing. I keep it in a safe place because I don't know, they made an upgrade to the application and my pass doesn't work anymore. And so psychologically, I feel good about having this piece of document, even though it's not as convenient to use as the mobile document, I think not having it sitting somewhere gives me a little bit of anxiety. I don't
Joseph,
know.
I think I didn't say that I would predict the fact that all the documents and that kind of tokens would be gone, but I would predict that some of the secure elements that are needed in today's identity schemes all over the world would be gone in the future, and you can do it based on software.
Okay, I think that's fair. It'd be interesting to see where that entire development takes place, how fast it's going to happen in developed context versus developing countries. We seem to see a lot of countries in Africa, for example, continue to hear their citizens asking for physical tokens, etc., and only dematerialize as an add-on, as an option in parallel. But this is a topic that we're going to watch very carefully. This is exactly the same question I've asked in a conference in Dubai 12 years ago, and there was the same answer that we got. It seems that the digital and the physical are coexisting. They're not killing each other yet. So for at least for another foreseeable future. Okay, one last question before we end this session, but very quickly, you have 2 minutes each if you care. I want you as experts, what advice do you give to countries in the early stages or who are considering offering mobile identity for their citizens so that they prepare themselves to do it right, so that when they get to the level of development that your experiences in the developed countries gives you, they get it right? So we'll start with somebody who we didn't start with before. Einārs, you want to start us on this?
Sure. Well, I think that actually this is the right time because the technology and security for it is already there. But, those countries who are leading the process, they will have big advantages regarding reputation, potential attractment of investments, taxes, citizens, etc. I can assure you when Estonians implemented e-voting and e-residency, a lot of countries saw that it is a bad and crazy idea. Probably a lot of still think so, but it is a fraction compared to the significant it has brought to Estonia on a global arena. So I think it is the right time and right place to do it.
Okay. Marie-Sophie, what advice do you give countries that want to follow your footsteps?
Yeah, in addition to what has been said, the experience has demonstrated that each country is different and it takes time to implement the right digital identity scheme. So countries need to start, if it's not the case already yet, look at what they already have in their countries that can be leveraged, focus on the root of trust, focus on the inclusion, and also benefit at the end of the day from all the work that has been done via other governments or via industrial associations, such as the ACA, for example. And I think my colleague Christelle will talk about it later on in the discussion. There are some reports that have been issued in order to analyze and compare the different digital identity ecosystems that have been put in place and deployed. And I think all of these elements are valuable information for states in order to find the right digital ID scheme for them and for their citizens.
So be fully informed and use the experiences of others. It's important to be informed before you make any decisions, because some of them could be irreversible. Okay, Hannes.
Yeah, thank you. I think I can agree with most of what my colleague from Idemia was telling. What I would add to on top of that is that I read from the Q&A chat earlier that the question was asked, so like, what do we do with the data being in different governmental silos? And based on that question, I would say that you should try to look the question of not just on trying to solve the identity puzzle, but also trying to look it together with data exchange problem in your country. Because if you look them completely separately, and if you try to solve these questions in different times, you may not finish right. But in terms of looking at the future, I think not even the wallet will save our day if we plan it wrong. For example, if we plan it together with some kind of physical tokens that have to be carried around, it just won't work.
Actually, an important point you raised, which is that don't think of identity as an end all, think of identity as a data flow, and it's an important enabling data flow. So you need to think of identity in the context of data. And that's very important that you understand those data flows and how interoperably it will flow from various applications to another. I think these are important lessons. We ran out of time for this segment. I thank you very much, the three of you, for your honest and engaging participation. I'd like to ask you if there are any questions online that you feel you can answer, to please go ahead and answer them, because we don't have time to give those answers explicitly, because we want to move on to segment 3. So thank you again for being with us, and we look forward to hearing more updates in the future about the exciting world of mobile and deployments that you're doing. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're now ready to move into segment 3. And in this segment, we will learn about how mobile is enabling some of the most common special purpose identity credentials and is adding a new dimension of convenience and functionality to these documents. We will learn about mobile digital travel documents, then mobile driver's licenses, and then regional identity credentials. I want to start with the DTCs, the digital travel documents, our credentials. And for that, I'd like to welcome Michael Edwards from Veridos. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Dr. Attic.
Thank you once again for being with us. Mobile seems to be finally revolutionizing some of the oldest and most used identity credentials. And here, of course, I'm talking about the travel documents and specifically the passport. So help us appreciate this development, understand its status currently in the world, and then its potential going forward.
So thank you, Dr. Attic, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here again, contributing to the panel. And so for the emerging topic of digital travel credentials, I have some visuals I would like to share with you that will make it easier to follow along. Okay. So give me a second to share my screen. So I hope you see the screen.
Yes.
So what are digital travel documents about? Digital travel documents, or in short, DTCs, work with or take advantage of NSC-enabled electronic machine readable documents. The most convenient way to issue and use DTCs is to upload them to a smartphone, but it's not limited to that form factor, so other form factors are possible as well. With a DTC Type 1, the citizen can perform self-onboarding, so from home, for example, by scanning the MRZ, the machine-readable zone, as a key to access the digital content by reading the NFC chip. However, this type is not suitable to replace the physical e-passport, but the data from the e-passport can be transferred to a reliant party and processed accordingly. The specification for so-called virtual components has been specified by ICAO. Now let's have a look at Type 2. The MZ is read and a subset of the logical data structure that resides in the chip of the e-passport, or in short, the LES structure is stored on the device. For Type 2, the smartphone needs to have a built-in or pluggable physical component, such as an eSIM or an equivalent accessible secure element. With that setup, a higher level of assurance can be achieved, and therefore more sensitive services can be provided. Obviously, a more convenient but secure border crossing is in the focus of ICAO. The issue assigns the virtual component, and ICAO defines in this case, the DTC may already be used in a border control use case. However, it is still recommended to carry the physical e-passport as a fallback option. The specification for the required physical component is ongoing and not yet finalized. We are contributing to the specification in the ICAO working group, as others do as well, which is led by Rajesh Kumar. And finally, a country may decide to completely issue the travel document as a DTC without a physical e-passport, which brings us to DTC Type 3. So going on with Type 3, the issuer not only signs the virtual component, so that's a difference to Type 2, but also issues it to the citizen. This, however, is not possible remotely. Applying for it has to be an in-person process. With this setup, in the future, the traveler may use the DTC Type 3 without having to carry a physical passport document, as we just discussed. Will we need a physical document in the future? Here you can see it is still complementary, I would say. Now let's have a closer look at DTC Type 1 as a starting point. So what makes it unique? What's the benefit and how can it drive adoption? So there are various statements here. So one of the, I think, things that really makes a DTC Type 1 unique is that you don't need any hardware storage. Yeah, so you can download this to low entry level smartphones and use it. So there's no technology barrier that you have to cope with, and only high level smartphones get of use. You can do remote self-enrollment, so you can do it from home. You don't have to walk into any facility, any government facility, or cumbersome video ident processes. And you can enhance the process by doing PKI checks, for example, if needed. So what is it really about? What's the catch here with DTC's Type 1? So most people I talk to tend to think of a DTC as a companion to or a replacement of a physical e-passport. This would then be DTC Type 2 and 3, as explained earlier. However, as a DTC Type 1 allows for self-enrollment with limited technical hurdles, it is already suitable for a broad range of use cases. But before we dive into details of specific use cases, I want to close this part with one last visual. We need to look at the business value that is provided by a DTC Type 1. A subset of the LDS data is transferred to the smartphone and afterwards to a service of a relying party. As the data is provided by an identity provider and signed by the issuer, the main benefit is data quality and reliability of the personal identification information of a traveler provided. And whoever experienced a case in the past that airport staff or border control staff stumbled over typos while applying for visas, purchasing a travel ticket, or crossing borders knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But before we get distracted, are there any questions?
Yeah, actually come back to the screen. In fact, in this setup that you're describing, data quality is key. But does that mean that the relying parties will have access to the PKD to be able to validate that this is truly a genuine passport and not something that has been signed bogusly and therefore bred into an ecosystem?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question. Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, the question is, in order, you're transferring the data from the passport through NFC to a mobile application, and the relying party is basically relying on the quality of the data that it is getting. So how do they know that this is a genuine passport? Are they able to use a PKD to check that it's digitally signed by the issuing authority or not?
Yeah, so you can use the public key directory if you have access to it, but also with issuing a physical e-passport, you also have the document signer within the chip, and you have the hash of the data that is being signed. So if you check that hash of the downloaded data, you will know if the data has been somehow changed.
Yes, but what about the data on the passport itself? How do you know that this is genuine data? The passport could be genuine, but issued by an entity that is not the issuing entity. In France's passport, I could generate a French passport. It won't be signed by the digital signature of the French minister.
Right, but for that purpose, exactly the PKD is available.
What you need.
Yeah,
right.
You would need that. Yeah, right.
I mean, when we have the physical passport, there's something more, which is this is a document that we can examine and we can tell that it is a high security printing document, and therefore we can have a little bit of trust that this is the data that in it is legitimate. And so it still serves as an important token. But when we go to a dematerialized completely, I think access to the PKD would be a requirement. Unfortunately, access to the PKD is not that simple because you have to actually pay for it. You have to be subscribed, no?
That is right. So you have to separate a little bit here the usage of such kind of data. So it is all also about level of assurance and classifying services into different buckets. So you have services where you may have a low entry level of a level of assurance or level of trust of the data. And then you have more sensitive services where you would need a certain infrastructure to access, for example, a PKD to assure that really only the rightful issuer provided the data out of the passport, right?
Okay, so let's talk then about some of the use cases for these digital travel credentials that you can see happening.
So we already mentioned some of the use cases, but especially with type 1, there are a variety of use cases that you can imagine. Yes, so once you have it downloaded on your smartphone, you may use it for example, visa application forms. Today, what you do, you go on a website and you type in everything manually. So that's where these typos happen, as I mentioned. So applications for other types of governmental travel documents, for example, for visas, for digital travel authorizations, for example, if we stay on more the government services side, but you could also use this data to fill forms when applying for flight tickets, for example. Or for you apply for some kind of government pension services, for example. That's the one side. The other side would be to use it for boarding, for example, or pre-processing of boarding. Today, what you have, if you fly internationally, you have the so-called APIS systems, the Advanced Passenger Information Systems, where you have to, maybe even 2-3 times in the flow, you hand over your passport to the boarding desk. Then you have pre-processing border guards that take your data to send it in advance and to the target country. And then you have the border crossing where you present that data again. Every time using the passport, it would enhance convenience.
Now, let me ask you, where does the DTC type 1 or whatever, reside? Will it reside in a wallet, or can it reside in a special app? Where will it reside?
So for DTC type 1, the storage location, the storage location is not limited. It can be a smartphone, but it can also be a laptop. Yeah, it could be it could be a laptop. It could even be some central cloud storage, for example. Then you again have interaction in the infrastructure. You have to ensure that only the rightful holder can download the data. For DTC type 2 and 3, it is still under a specification and it is not a release, but as I explained, you need something like a secure element, or an eSIM to store that onto.
Okay. So when do you expect these specifications to be out?
As mentioned, for DTC type 1, it is already out. And for type 2 and 3, for the physical component, I think by end of the year, we should at least have the first final drafts released.
Okay, so it's fair to say we're still in the early stages of adoption curve. This is mostly in pilots. The specifications for 2 and 3 are not done yet. Type 1 is done, but there's not yet significant adoption. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. We are starting to use it, and I would encourage to start also using, to get used to how to use it in different use cases and scenarios, to start using DTC type 1 as well.
Right. I mean, especially because the DTC type 1, the barrier to entry is quite low. I mean, once you issue the passport, getting it to a DTC type 1 is not much of a development or a technology hurdle. So this is good advice to countries that are listening to this. Unfortunately, Michael, we ran out of time. I want to thank you for this insightful conversation, and we will be looking forward to hearing more in the future about the adoption and the issuance of the standards and specifications for type 2 and 3. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now continue with Mark Sullivan from Canadian Banknotes, who will tell us about an important class of credentials that's rapidly being adopted around the world. And here I'm talking about mobile driver's licenses, or MDLs. So Mark, what are these? Help us appreciate their significance.
Thank you, Dr. Attic. I'll also pull up a couple slides here to help support my discussion. So as you can see here, an MDL, or a mobile driver's license, is it's a data format that's been designed by an ISO standard. That's ISO 180135. What this actually does give us at the end of the day is a mobile credential. Really, the standard covers the data model of the credential itself, as well as the protocols used for transferring the data from that credential to a verifier, and also the mechanisms by which you can verify that data and the digital signatures included on that credential. So what we get out of this is we get, a mobile credential that we can store on our personal device, such as a smartphone, and it also provides the means that we can now digitally assert that information or the privileges about ourselves. It should be noted that although the standard was developed sort of with a top-down approach to looking at putting your driver's license into a digital format, it has since been extended into what they call the mobile document format, where now we can support additional document types. So we're not limited to representing driver's licenses, but health credentials or insurance credentials, anything you can really think of that you can model. We can use this format and standard to be able to digitize and start sharing that data. So in that sense, it's very powerful. The standard also, of course, because it's talking about how these systems interoperate, it allows jurisdictions to each issue their own driver's license. And as long as you have a shared public key infrastructure, you can go ahead and start interoperating across jurisdictional boundaries. In the US, we see this with different states that issue their driver's licenses, and you can travel between the states and use your MDL wherever you might be. It's also important to take a look at what an MDL isn't, right? It's not just a photograph of your license on your phone, or a rendering of that data that you would then hold your phone up to someone and they would visually look at it like they would a physical license. Of course, doing that sort of sidesteps all the physical security features you have on a traditional document today. So that aspect of digitally presenting the license and verifying it, there's an active security protocol that gets engaged, and that's giving you, the security and the trust behind that verification scenario that you're executing. The second thing it's important to point out is it's not a QR or a barcode that just contains your personal information with a digital signature on it. Many driver's licenses today, if you flip it to the back, you'll see there's a big what's called a PDF barcode that has your name and your date of birth and things like that with a signature on it. Of course, the issue there is anyone could take a copy of that barcode and re-represent it. So again, this digital presentation of the information means that we can put certain security mechanisms in there so that when you present it, your license, today or 5 minutes ago, that information, that same presentation can't be replayed in an attack to try to assert your identity a second time. And MDL is also not a digital tracking program, so kind of if you think of verifiable credential models where you have identity at the edge and you have a peer-to-peer transaction where a holder is interacting directly with a verifier. It works much like how we work today when you might hand over a physical card and they just take a look at it and hand it back. They don't get on the phone typically and call the issuing authority to check the data. The MDL is designed to operate in an offline manner the same way, so there's no need to call home to verify the data that's being presented. And I think the final point here to really point out about what an MDL isn't is the MDL standard itself isn't a full solution definition. You need to decide as an issuing authority if you're even going to issue an MDL to a certain individual or not. There's other aspects such as how the actual credential gets sent to your device and persisted on your device that aren't covered by the standard. So again, it really is focused on this data model and the actual interoperability aspects of the credential there. With that in mind, why are we seeing adoption of the MDL credential? And it's helpful here to sort of apply 3 different lenses on this. The first being, from the issuing authority's perspective, we're finding that in large part, this is driven by demand from the customers. You can picture being standing in line and you're about to go through a transaction where you need to prove your age, and you're probably playing around on your phone and oh geez, I got to go in and dig in my purse or my pocket and get my wallet out so I can prove my age. Why can't I just do this with my phone? And issuing authorities are starting to hear that feedback now. There's also advantages on the issuing party side in terms of being a first party verifier. So if you do start issuing, these national or state level credentials, the government itself could be a verifier now. When you call into a call center, for example, how can you leverage the fact that everyone's walking around with this identity token in their pocket to sidestep some of those security questions type answers that you might just be able to go and get on someone's Facebook to answer. From the holder's perspective, the personal convenience again, if you have your phone in your hand, why can't we go ahead and use that right away? But then we also have the privacy enhancing features, which we touched on in the earlier panel about minimal disclosure and things like that are supported by the MDL standard. And then finally, as a verifier, checking an MDL gives you a very, very high level of assurance that the information you're seeing is genuine and issued by the party you expect it to be coming from. With that in mind, I'd like to step forward and talk a little bit about, how does an MDL program actually work? What are sort of the stages here going from, I don't have an MDL right now to how can I actually go and prove my age or some other piece of information about myself? So again, I mentioned earlier that the MDL standard doesn't cover, the end-to-end development of a full solution here. And this slide sort of covers 2 elements that aren't included in the standard technically, but are required for this program to operate. The first being the enrollment or the entitlement process, right? So, oftentimes if we're talking about a driver's license, you already have a system of record of that individual with a biometric attached to it. And you're in a great shape if you can do that, because you can now offer remote enrollment. So using multi-factor authentication, presence of the physical document coupled with a biometric check using some of the technologies that have been discussed on previous panels, such as liveness detection and presentation attack detection, you can create a high level of assurance that you are remotely issuing an MDL to someone sitting on their couch at home without them needing to come in. Of course, where that model doesn't work, in-person processes can be introduced where an operator does a traditional identity authentication check and then clicks a button to approve the MDL issuance. And then that's where the second part comes in, the provisioning aspect. So how do we actually get this credential onto somebody's device? So one key element here is the concept of device binding. So we do, when we provision an MDL, like to do a device binding process so that only that device that we are sending the MDL to could ever successfully use that MDL and have it successfully verified. So it's kind of a mechanism to tie the credential to an actual physical piece of hardware. And the second aspect here that's important to call out is the provisioning to a mobile wallet. That could be a first-party wallet the issuing authority develops and offers themselves. It could be a third-party wallet that supports the 180135 standard. And as we're seeing in the States right now, it could also be a platform-based wallet. So Apple Pay in the US is now supporting MDL. So there isn't a need for users on that program to go and download a separate application to act as a wallet, but rather it's getting built straight into the iOS platform itself for out-of-the-box compatibility. Once we have our mobile credential on our device, we want to go and use it, right? So I mentioned that you'll see the QR code on the left-hand side there. That QR code, again, doesn't contain the personal information or the MDL data itself. What it does contain is a set of instructions to the verifier on what modes for connecting are actually available or being made available by the holder. These generally, you can generally present this information in two ways. The first being a QR code, which can be visually scanned with a scanner, as you see on the right-hand side, or this information can be transmitted with NFC through a tapping procedure. So you can picture just walking up to the counter, tapping your phone, and that engagement process kicks off. So the verifier, when it gets this engagement data, can now decide, okay, is this going to be an online or an offline transaction? Offline, it can happen with Bluetooth or NFC or Wi-Fi direct. In the online model, which again is something that the holder can optionally provide, they would provide a token, which can then be exchanged with a web server on the issuing authority side to get a live real-time view of that data back for those very high value transactions. So once that connection mode is established and the verifier knows how they want to make their request, they go ahead and request a specific set of data from the MDL. So again, this isn't like handing over your physical license where a verifier can read the entire contents, whether they want it or not. They can request only the elements they need to see. So in that screenshot at the center of your screen there, you'll see that this verifier has only requested the primary photo as well as proof that the holder is over a certain age. So we're not even disclosing the date of birth, for example, here. This is nice for the verifier because it simplifies the operation. It's a nice clean interface and they can check what they need to check, but also they don't have that liability of collecting that data that they don't really have a use for. The second important component to the request section is the concept of consent. On the left-hand side, you'll see this is a typical consent screen, but whatever fields the verifier does request, that does come back to the user and they have the ability to say, yes, I do approve that this transaction is occurring and I want this information delivered. Or of course, they could decline that and the verifier wouldn't be able to access any of that detail. The verification process follows afterwards, which is automated to the standard where it will check the digital signatures and such to gain a couple of very important assurances. First and foremost, that the issuing authority that you're expecting did digitally sign and authenticated this data. Of course, we also check that the data hasn't been modified by either the holder or a third party since it's been issued. And then finally, we also do that device binding check. So making sure that the device presenting the data is the rightful device that the issuing authority issued it to. One other interesting aspect about the verification element here is especially in the States, you can picture if someone's job is to go and validate people's licenses and check their age as they come in. When licenses come from out of state, it's kind of put on the verifier behind the counter to understand, okay, well, now this is an out of state driver's license. How do I know this is a legitimate document? Where do I look for the date of birth? How do I do all these checks? That all gets streamlined, of course, through this digital channel because we can render the results of any MDL check consistently, regardless of the jurisdiction that might have issued the credential there. Final note I want to just touch on is MDL adoption. It's been boosted quite significantly by endorsement by the AMVA, the Motor Vehicle Administrators Association in North America, as well as EREG in Europe and OSRoads in Australia and New Zealand. And where we're seeing the greatest growth right now is clearly in the United States. There's half a dozen programs that are going live and piloting right now. And you can see on that map there, all those sort of teal colors are other states that are very interested in the technologies and are undergoing things like legislative review and how they can enable their DMVs to start issuing these types of credentials. But internationally, we're seeing some movement as well. Queensland in Australia is working to implement an ISO compliant MDL and as well as the Czech Republic too. So I'll stop there for a moment and see if you have any questions for me.
Yes, come back. Actually, can you explain a little bit better the offline security mechanism? As you know, physical driver's licenses, we spend a lot of money on security printing. And so an operator, a police officer, or somebody checking can see that this is a legitimate from the holograms, etc. If I'm offline, completely offline, and there are 50 different states, how do I check offline that this was issued by the authority that is legitimate to issue it?
Right. So in terms of how you would recognize the other states, AMVA is working on something called the Digital Trust Service, which is essentially going to be a PKI for the issuing authorities to store their certificates. So in an offline context, you could have you have a cached version of those certificates, which you can then do a traditional certificate authentication against.
So this is like a PKD for the passports that's being done in that context. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's very similar. So AMVA is going out and they're now building their proof of concept for that structure, and we do expect it to look very similar to the ICAO PKD.
PKD. Okay, you mentioned very briefly standard ISO 1813-5. I understand that this is under review, and we should be expecting 7 coming up. What is missing from the 1813-5? What is the standard? What's missing?
Yeah, so 180135 covers those elements I talked about with the data model and the transmission and the verification protocols, and that standard's finalized now. There's 2 follow-up standards which are being worked on. -6 right now is standardizing testing methods for MDLs, so that there'll be a standard approach to testing to certify MDL implementations. And then -7 is looking at extended usages of the MDLs and in particular how we can present and utilize MDLs in an online context. So you can, now that you have this jurisdictional or state or national issued identity in your possession, how can you assert that identity online with confidence and in a standardized way?
And what about provisioning? Who's covering provisioning?
Yeah, so provisioning, it is up to the implementers how provisioning will occur. There are best practices that are recommended by AMVA, and in large part, most people are turning towards another ISO standard, which is 23220-3, which covers how backend systems should communicate with a user's device, and provisioning would fall under that umbrella there.
Okay. One other thing you mentioned is Apple being automatically out of the box, giving you the ability to store your driver's license in the Apple Wallet. Does that give you concerns about vendor lock-in if Apple starts to become the de facto wallet where everybody stores their credentials in?
Yeah, so Apple is working with states to bring that capability online. So it really is up to the states to determine if they want to, just offer Apple integration and all their users can go through that platform. We're also seeing other models where it's more of an open choice for the user. So you can use your Apple Wallet, or you can download a first-party application that can do the same behavior. So in that sense, there's lots of avenues where you don't necessarily have to lock into a specific vendor or application.
It's definitely a dynamic field that we expect this to continue to grow. And especially in the international market now, we're hearing a lot about mobile driver's licenses. Mark, we ran out of time. Thank you so much for this overview. Wonderful to hear from you. And we hope to hear in the future more updates on this exciting development. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Okay, so finally, this is going to be the third part of this segment, and where we're going to explore regional identity on a mobile platform, basically. Regional identity is an area which has attracted political interest, at least over the last 15 years. But one where no compelling methodology for achieving it, other than building redundant identity credentials, had emerged. Here I can cite the ECOWAS and the East African Identity Initiatives, among others. For the most part, countries prefer to develop their national identity first and have deferred dealing with these regional credentials, which in any case serve a small segment of the population that has a need to transact across borders. But we may be now in front of a game changer. Instead of ECOWAS cards, should we perhaps be talking about ECOWAS digital identity wallets? To help us answer this question and understand the full potential of mobile as a game changer for interoperable regional identity schemes, we're pleased to have with us Crystal Teras from Thales, representing the Secure Identity Alliance. Crystal, welcome again, and thank you for being with us. Okay, let me start by asking you to sort of motivate and review regional identity initiatives. How important has regional identity been?
Sure. So in fact, what we can say is that identity always starts with national ground and domestic purpose. But with globalization, clearly the way we think of identity and the way we consume the identity is clearly changing. And governments' vision are also maturing a lot more, and they see the potential of extending the scope of the recognition of identity at regional level, not only to ease cross-border traveling, but also to really boost the economy and by easing transactions in between citizens, businesses within the different member states. And based on this, on those ambitions, many initiatives have taken place in Africa, but also around the world, as we've seen previously. And those initiatives clearly illustrate this, what we can call mega trend. We really go towards regional identity capabilities. That's on top of the agenda of most governments as a next steps. If we look at Africa, we can look at the, and we look more particularly at the ECOWAS region, we can see that they basically defined the specification for the ECOWAS electronic identity cards with the goal to, of course, lower barriers. We can see the same willingness to standardize the identity card in Europe, of course, and with a contactless biometric electronic ID card, which is currently being deployed by member states. Still in the ECOWAS region, there is also the RERI project, which aims at providing a unique identification for regional integration, but also inclusion. And this is based on foundational identity, which is supported by biometric technology and funded by World Bank. So lots of initiatives, and we can say that this call for regional identity is even more important with this continental free trade agreement, which was signed back in 2018, which creates, like Europe did previously, a single African market with free movement of person, goods, businesses, and investments. So what we can see is that indeed there is a need for regional identity, clearly, and we are just waiting for to see it further materialized.
Now, to follow up on this, I mean, clearly the political will and interest has been high in regional identity, but it hasn't really been realized in a systematic way. What do you estimate were the obstacles, or are continue to be the obstacles, in the realization of regional identity schemes?
Well, I would say that it's you know, those African initiatives are very ambitious, like any interoperable and regional identity schemes. As we saw before, it takes a long time. It took a long time to Europe. They haven't even finalized their vision. So you know, for those African initiatives, it's also complex projects. So they have to face up to face up some challenges, which are obviously slowing down the time to market. It doesn't mean that you know, there isn't the light at the back of the funnel, but it takes time. It's complex, it takes time, it takes a lot of effort from everyone. And if we look at Africa, we can see that there is a discrepancy in the maturity of existing national identity ecosystem, which is already a challenge, because on one side, you have some countries which are only starting building up their capabilities and their population registry. And of course, we all know that citizens' involvement takes time. And on the other side, you have countries which have already built a national ID infrastructure, and they need to upgrade those existing infrastructure to be interoperable. So that takes, of course, time. So those projects are complex. Perhaps we can say as well in Africa, what is also a challenge is perhaps political changes and instability in some regions of Africa, which are slowing down those initiatives furthermore. And also, I would say that identity use cases really remain limited when they are only based on physical documents, or when they are only based purely on biometrics. I believe that, of course, services are and will be dematerialized in Africa. So what Africa needs is not only a digital identity which can handle face-to-face identification proofing, but also online use cases. That's perhaps those limited use cases which are contributing to slowing down implementation, because the drivers are not strong enough perhaps to move faster.
Yeah, in fact, I've always thought the concept of interoperable regional identity, which was pursued as a parallel track many countries in Africa, where you had your essentially national identity document, and then you went in and applied for an ECOWAS document in addition. I always thought that this was really the wrong strategic approach, because it just lost an opportunity, because the document or an ID should have been able to operate in any environment. And so now we are entering a new world where mobile identity is essentially becoming the digital twin of the physical identity that exists. Do you see mobile identity as the mechanism for achieving regional identity without having to force these governments to issue yet more the physical documents?
Yes, completely. I would say that the beauty of the digital identity wallet solution is that it's going to bridge not all the gaps, but at least some of the gaps, and it will ease interoperability, especially with the latest standards which are being published or about to be published. Mm-hmm. And that means that even if the national identity systems are not identical, Africa can still envision a regional identity without having to start from scratch again. So that means that each country can still have their own national ID scheme. And finally, the wallet will only serve as a regional identity channel or layer, which comes on top of a national scheme.
I believe you prepared a couple of visuals for us on explaining how an ECOWAS wallet could work. Do you have that?
I shared them with your team.
Actually, it's on. Yeah. So let us try to understand basically how a digital ID wallet, regional ID wallet, could deliver essentially the ECOWAS dream. I'm using ECOWAS as a generic term here.
Sure.
I'm not picking on anybody, but so guide us through that.
Sure. So basically, a digital ID wallet, to make it work, of course, we need mutual recognition by all member states of the digital credential which is hosted in the wallet. And to reach this mutual trust, we of course need to set up the scene and build build a trust framework. So how do we build this trust framework? First of all, member states need to define the level of security, which will be commonly accepted by all member states when citizens on board to the wallet, because once again here, the ID proofing, when you create a wallet, the ID proofing is essential, is key, and you need to it needs to be based on roots and foundational identity. So it can be a document, it can be pure biometrics, depending on what is available in the country. That's the reason why the wallet, in a sense, give a much more flexibility. You don't need to start from scratch. You can leverage on what you have already. Be it a physical document, you can use NFC with face recognition. You can use for countries which have already a biometric registry, they can tap into it and leverage on it. So lots of different options, giving more flexibility, needed flexibility to make it faster. And you, of course, also need, we were talking about privacy earlier on. Today, nowadays, security and privacy really goes hand in hand. And I think what's important as well is to ensure citizens' data privacy. So that's the reason why at country level and also at regional level, there were lots of privacy acts which are being adopted. Of course, the GDPR in Europe is very well known, but there is also as well POPI in South Africa, which is strong as well. So that's for the trusted framework, but you also need at technical level, you also need to look at international standards which are recognized by all. We were earlier on talking about the ISO 18013-5, which is basically the standard which defines the specification for the mobile driving license. But this standard does much more, because surely it focuses on mobile driving license, but what is interesting with this standard is it really defines the specification to establish a secure communication channel when you are going to exchange information. So this type of standard, this part of the standard can easily be reused for any other purpose. And it also defines the way you are going to share the data. The same goes with the ISO 23220, which defines the provisioning of a mobile credential and define how you will be sharing those credentials with another device. And this standard is about to be released as well. So basically, Africa doesn't need to start from scratch. They can leverage on what they have. Fortunately, standards are coming. Europe had been waiting for them for a while, but now they are there. The ISOs are coming, and there are many standards which are enabling more digitalization of credential in a secure way. And so that means that the good news is everything, the technology is there, and the standards are also there to best support Africa with this with those regional initiatives. Clearly,
I think those are actually, there are three takeaways that are important to keep in mind. The technology is there. Now we're seeing the wallet as a potential direction for achieving the interoperability. It's not enough by itself. It's a technology platform. The standards are actually happening. You've basically mentioned some of them, but also the standards like OSIA standards that are being done for the systems themselves. But equally importantly, the harmonization of identity practices across countries. I mean, you have a country where doesn't do identity proofing correctly, and they let somebody into the system fraudulently, and then the relying party in the second country will have to accept the fact that they entered that ecosystem fraudulently. So, you know, this is the issue with the electronic passport that we struggled with for 20 years, which is how to establish uniform standards for identity proofing so that all countries can trust each other. Is there any insights that you can share on this issue?
I would say that this is probably the key of everything, defining the right level of security to onboard to a digital identity wallet. Obviously, we were talking about convenience earlier on, so the best way to boost adoption is to offer remote onboarding. Right. But if we are in a situation where security is not achieved, the right level of security is not achieved, then it's probably better to go for face-to-face, leveraging on what you were you started the session with it. You know, the importance of a public-private partnership. Why not leveraging on MNOs, on banks to help onboard to the wallet? And as we said earlier on, what is interesting with the wallet is, first of all, because one thing which is important as well is, for interoperability, you also need to define the data flow in between the different countries. That will take time as well. But the beauty of the ISO 18013 is, as mentioned earlier on as well, it can also work in a non-connected mode, which is to say that once you have onboarded securely to your wallet, you have it, you can travel with it, and you can even if all the you can still prove your identity, share your attributes in a non-connected mode if needed.
Right. But I mean, fundamentally, do you see a way around having to invest in PKI for regional identity purposes? I mean, a lot of people get a little bit nervous about thinking that everything as a trust framework is going to be based on public key infrastructure and encryption of this sort. Do you see any way around it, or this is a necessary step that we all have to develop capacity around?
To me, PKI is build the trust in in the ecosystem, in the foundational identity, and this is essential. So I am in favor indeed of investing in PKI, because we are also talking about digital signature. It enables the right level of trust, and it can open the door as well to many use cases. So yes, definitely.
Now, Crystal, do you have any advice that you can give to regional authorities like ECOWAS, East African Community, SADC, that are listening right now, how for them to accelerate the launch of their regional initiatives?
I think the good news as well, and this webinar is a proof of it. Europe is moving. There will be lots of pilots for the next 2 years, with different pilots being run in parallel. So of course, lessons will be learned, because it's a new topic for everyone. Technology is there, but it's also about fine-tuning everything. So I believe that Africa will have a lot to learn from. We will all have a lot to learn from those pilots, and Africa will probably be able to perhaps go even faster, leapfrog. This we are always talking about leapfrogging for Africa, and indeed that can be the case for the wallet as well, because everyone will have tried and perhaps failed before Africa start, and they will avoid all the pitfalls.
So there is good news here. You're not alone. You're
Absolutely.
not going at it alone. The world is heading in this direction. I believe myself personally, as an expert in the field, the identity wallet is an inevitable development. And the good news is Europe is leading the way in advanced economies to experiment and pilot, and that Africa can benefit by staying informed about what works and what doesn't work. And here at ID for Africa, we intend to continue this series and pay attention to the developments that ultimately will help achieve this trustworthy regional identity schemes. Crystal, we ran out of time. I really thank you for your intervention,
for having me,
for participation. It was wonderful to have you. We look forward to a future engagement with you again. Thank you. Okay, now we've reached segment 4, which is the final word. I mean, we have basically so far talked a lot about exciting developments in the world of mobile identity coming from Advanced Economies, and how they're going to trickle down into the development context and how they're going to impact the development context. As I warned you from the beginning, I said the mobile wallet is going to recur in every single one of these panels and sessions. It did indeed, and so keep an eye on it. It's going to be an important development. But that does not mean that this is risk-free. There are no issues. In this final panel, we want to explore the dark side of mobile identity. This is in the tradition of ID for Africa, maintaining the balance, making sure that we're not driven by technology. We're actually driven by the need to respond to an actual need in a responsible manner, to accelerate development, social and economic development. So here in this panel, we want to understand what are the risks and what needs to be done to mitigate them through the appropriate guardrails. I'm pleased to have with me on this panel 3 experts representing various civil societies across Africa to share their perspectives. I'm pleased to welcome Teki Falconer, who's not a new face. She's been with us several times before. From Ghana, Solomon Okedara, who also been with us before, from Nigeria, and then introducing Nolwazi Hlophe from South Africa. They're representing, of course, 3 prominent civil society organizations on the continent. Thank you all for being with us. I want to start by reminding the audience that during this entire series, we have repeatedly seen the increased role of private-public partnerships, which seem to be accelerating enrollment and enhancing inclusion. One in particular is the partnership between the mobile network operators and the identity authorities. It is safe to say that there is a significant opportunity here across all of Africa to involve the MNOs in the development of foundational digital ID. Linking the SIM to the NIN creates demand for NIN, leverages the much larger footprint of the MNOs to help identity authorities expand their touch points with the population and accelerate enrollment. Downstream, we see the MNOs and other financial service providers being able to offer new services based on verifiable and fixed identity, which motivate even more demand for enrollment and create sticky and compelling use cases for digital identity, as we've been discussing all through. So this type of partnership is here to stay and should be encouraged. Certainly, mobile identity, which is its offspring, can only grow. But given the critical role of this type of PPPs are expected to continue to play, we should pause and examine if there are hidden risks or pitfalls that we should be aware of, and they should be mitigated. I want to start with Nolwazi and basically pose the question: does Africa have the appropriate legal and regulatory guardrails necessary to ensure these PPPs and their offspring, mobile identity, which are moving really fast, do not derail and do not harm the interest of the people?
Thank you, Dr. Atik. I think this is a very important question because the past 3 sessions have been discussing good application sites and opportunities, but we need to consider the background and how we ensure that there's consumer trust and therefore uptake, and make sure that the consumer is protected and that there's proper recourse. So when you look at Africa, only 33 countries in Africa have data protection and privacy laws. And even those numbers, I'm sorry, I'm a bit ill with a cold. With even those 33 countries, some of them only have the laws, like the bill has just been approved, but they haven't enforced them. There is no independent authority that is enforcing that act. You could even see with South Africa that the POPI Act only came into being enforced last year, even though it was approved a while back. So there's a gap there. Even further, you look at the then next step, the cybersecurity or cybercrime legislation. only 39 countries out of the 54 countries in Africa have some form of cybercrime legislation, and we don't even, and we can't even confirm whether it extends to what we're seeing now with the innovations in digital identity or even digital signatures. Some of them need to go back and be amended for all of that. And then there's still the question, because now even regulators are grappling around where data can be stored, or is the cloud okay or not? Regulations still need to be developed around that. So this raises the questions of, okay, we need to develop further legal and regulatory infrastructure that's comprehensive to make sure that individuals can feel safe within identity systems that are developed in part with the public and private partnership. And even then, with the public and private partnership, you need to develop that partnership very well, because there's a thin line where data may be misused by, potentially by the MNOs. So if you find yourself using an MOU between the two in the partnership, that basically means nothing, because MOUs are not legally enforceable. So you might need to take it a step further and think about contractual agreements, service agreements, or NDAs to make sure that the data taken from the MOU, the consumer data, is sent directly to the identity authority, and that it doesn't stay with the mobile network operator. And so that is definitely something to consider when you're thinking about, okay, how do we start off looking at the landscape of regulation? I'm so sorry, of regulation within the African jurisdiction. But I'll explore this further as we discuss the data governance, and that will also expand how all of these regulations come in.
Yeah, Nolwazi, rest your voice a little bit. I'll come back to you in the second round. But basically, what you painted is that the legal and regulatory frameworks are not mature in Africa. That's one more reason that we have to insist on the development of these data protection and privacy laws and regulations, but also on making stopgap measures and guardrails, some of which we're going to be talking about next. Rest up, Nolwazi, I'll come back to you. But I want to move to Teki. From a practical point of view, how significant is this gap that we just talked about, the lack of data protection and privacy in Africa in the context of mobile identity? So practically speaking, it is a gap, but from a practical point of view, are there other things that are governing the MNOs or governing the financial service providers, which make the eventuality of abuse less real? So Teki, give us a perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Atik. Every ID that is being issued must be based on a framework of trust. There are a number of elements that come together to really put together this framework of trust. Unfortunately, for a lot of African countries, and the Africa Digital Rights have started highlighting the challenges that we saw in the digital ID ecosystem back in 2018 when we had our first Data Protection Africa Summit. Now, the technical infrastructure may all be well and good, but we also need some foundational frameworks by way of legislations, and not just legislations, but implementation of these legislations to give the necessary assurances to citizens that, you know, even in the worst case scenario, if something should go wrong, I can be protected within my ecosystem. Data protection laws are therefore definitely one of the very critical enabling legal environments that you can put in place to really build trust and integrity in a mobile ID ecosystem. And it's not just about the laws. Implementation of the laws play an even much more significant role. Now, when you're talking about data protection, that is where the issues of, for instance, data minimization can be critically enforced. That is where the issues of user rights and management can be put in place. That is where you look at, putting in place adequate security safeguards and questioning, whether it's a government operative or a private sector operative. That is where we can question whether or not the security features that have been put in is really adequate to secure the information that is being shared across platforms. And also, a lot of these things are based on people, and we want to really understand what is going on. And so a data protection framework really gives you that transparency and open approach, which also leads to assurance and integrity in all of these. So indeed, it is very significant, and the lack of a very mature data protection ecosystem definitely creates a challenge when we are beginning to talk about things like mobile identity in the future.
Okay, so, but let us drill down and focus on basically an important actor which has emerged as a significant player in the identity ecosystem, which is the mobile network operators. Some would argue that these mobile network operators are multinationals and they hold themselves to a higher level of regulations that are not just the local regulations. They tend to respect things even as stringent as the GDPR because they worry about liability across countries, etc. To what extent do you think this should give us some comfort, the fact that these are big organizations that are multinationals and they hold themselves to a higher authority than the local laws? Or maybe this is not give us any comfort at all.
I don't think it should give us any comfort at all. Last year, we had the South African information regulator speaking about concerns that she had with one of the biggest multinationals in terms of how they handle data. These multinationals are seen across Europe, and they are implementing the GDPR to the letter. However, we are seeing a trend on our continent that when it comes here, it comes to our continent, and because of lack of strong enforcement, that comes with our legislative frameworks, we're actually seeing a lot of multinational organizations that are either too compliant, not necessarily complying with the regulations, even if they are not as stringent. So I don't think that really gives us that assurance. The other thing is that there are certain, let me just give you even a simple thing, as notices and user rights. If you take almost all the African countries that have data protection laws that are implementing it, you'll probably find a handful of them are actively engaging with their consumers around their rights, around whether or not I can make requests, I can delete information. And so unfortunately, as we like to say, data is the new oil. And, usually the lack of having adequate legislations in place really gives some organizations a lot more impetus to be able to use the information in the way that they want to. So the fact that you do not have it, have these legislations in place should not necessarily give you assurance because you think that they may be complying with other jurisdictions' laws. And the other challenge that comes in there as well is that when you are enforcing, how would you enforce the legislations? If I'm a citizen in Ghana and my rights have been violated, I cannot flag GDPR. you know. So again, that does not give me as an African citizen that trust, you know, to be able to use and utilize these frameworks adequately.
Okay, fair enough. I think it's important that we do have national regulations and national legislations that are going to raise to the right level of protection for the citizens of that country, for people in Africa. I'm going to come back to this topic, Teki. Hold on. There are a couple of other points where there are misconceptions or things that we need to lay out on the table so that we all agree if they are serious or not. But I want to take sidebar with Solomon. I want to focus on a specific country, which is Nigeria. Solomon, you come from Nigeria, and this is a country where mobile is making most progress and pushing identity enrollment. Can you give us a quick update on what is happening in Nigeria with the data protection legal framework? Where are we?
Thank you, Dr. Atik, and thank you everyone for having me. Now, until January 2019, Nigeria did not have any piece of legislation regulating processing of personal data in Nigeria. And of course, on January 25, 2019, now the National Information Technology Development Agency, otherwise called NITDA, issued what is now today known as Nigeria Data Protection Regulation, which piece of legislation made a fair attempt at regulating personal data in Nigeria. Now, but I need to be very clear and emphatic on the phrase fair attempt. Fair attempt because up to January 2019, we did not have any piece of legislation we can fall back on when any citizen or resident alleges issue of breach of personal data. But then the question is this piece of legislation, which is regulation, is it sufficient? The answer is no. Then why is it not sufficient? I'm going to be talking about just about 4 points why it is not sufficient and why we need a comprehensive data protection legislation. Now, number one, now the data protection regulation we have today now focuses essentially on electronic data, you know, in its description or definition of personal data. And if we look at the ID ecosystem, the part of or the point of enrollment, now sometimes you have situations where enrollee will have to go through supplying their personal information, personal data on paper. Now, the question is, when you look at the position of NDPR, it is quite restrictive in that regard. Number two, now the supervisory authority that issued NDPR is in itself not an independent authority. And when you look at it, there is no how you can have an effective enforcement of any legislation, particularly a data protection legislation, without independence of the authority. Now, looking at GDPR, that NDPR attempted to be modeled after. Now, GDPR does not only provide for independence of supervisory authority, it makes clear and specific provision on independence. Independence as to funding of supervisory authority. Independence as to technical operations of such authority. Then the third point I'm going to raise, which is very strategic, is the fact that NDPR focuses more on impossible penalty on data controllers that breach personal data. Then where do you leave the data subject? Now, there are no clear position on how data subject can challenge infringement of their personal data. But if we look at GDPR, GDPR has very robust mechanism. In fact, it goes to the point of permitting now organizations to approach the court and enforce rights of data subjects who have alleged infringement on their personal data.
So Solomon, Nigeria does have a regulation, which is the NDPR, but it doesn't have a legislation. So in your message here, just so I summarize to people, you believe regulations are not enough to provide the protection that is needed for a digital or mobile identity. You want legislation, not regulation. Am I quoting you correctly?
Very well, Dr.
Okay.
Now, so in this situation. Now, Dr. Attic, when you look at it, now a data protection legislation, what Nigeria actually needs, which we have had a couple of attempts. Now we have had Data Protection Bill 2019, we have had Data Protection Bill 2020. Now, if they had been successfully passed, we would have had Data Protection Act, which would have successfully, completed a legislative journey, which journey would have given opportunity to civil society to contribute, to members of the public, and to all critical stakeholders, in data protection governance in Nigeria. Now, but when you look at how a regulation, particularly NDPR, emerged, it was actually an issuance of a particular agency, which is an extension of the executive arm of the government. It did not go through any process of criticism, of analysis that a substantive and a foolproof piece of legislation should have gone through.
Okay, hold on to that thought, Solomon. Nolwazi, are you able to speak? Is your voice back?
Yes, my voice is back now.
Okay, so but slowly, don't stress it. I want to understand from the research that you do at the Digital Frontiers Institute, how aware is the general public about the issue of data protection and privacy and the rights under that? I mean, not everybody speaks with the same passion as Solomon and Teki. Does the general public care?
As I was conducting my research, I found a report published by a civil society organization speaking to some of the points that Solomon was highlighting now, that they published, and the publication is called a Privacy Scorecard Report last year, where the performance index score of some African countries, which include Uganda, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Kenya, Malawi, Nigeria, and South Africa was just 35%, and only 54% were complying with privacy best practices, and only 19% mentioning third parties with whom personal data is shared. So you can already see how poor the compliance to data protection is. And so they also identified the lack of consistency, even with across the countries in accountability on collecting consumer data. And for example, they gave with MTN, where in South Africa, they're more robust with their data protection and privacy because of the POPI Act. But they collect more indicators for data protection and privacy. But in Uganda, they collect fewer indicators and they're more relaxed, and then they put fewer resources towards protecting consumers' data and their privacy. So they're very aware, and even in their report, they mentioned that when drafting the legislation and establishing the independent information protector or data protection institution, they need to consult civil society, because this is consumer data. They need to work with them in drafting how they will enforce the regulations that they will write under the act that establishes them. They need to talk to them around how recourse will be conducted, because they will be the ones that are hard hit by their data being breached. And this brings, again, ties together how the limited regulations and legal infrastructure in Africa really needs to be built up. So it's like looking at, even when you think about digital financial services, there's the policy infrastructure that needs to be built before you start thinking now of the technology and the other regulatory enablers. There's your technical and legal and regulatory infrastructure that needs work before you start thinking about other things. So they need to make sure that the data authority ensures transparency on data governance models used by private companies, so that people know how their data is being stored, how their data is being used, as well as on what grounds they should give up and as well as people should always they must let people know that they shouldn't give up their privacy for convenience. And I think this was mentioned in one of the previous sessions, that no matter how convenient it is, do not give up your privacy. So definitely civil society should be engaged, and they really know about it. But obviously, there are still those who are still digitally and excluded and with low digital literacy, who need to be brought up to speed. Because when you think about enrollment, and there's a question that we might discuss later if we have time, and you think about especially women, where in some countries in Africa, the social context requires them to stay at home and look after the children, then their digital literacy is very low. And now the enrollment officers need to go to them and not expect the women to come to them, because they can't leave their households. But let me stop here for now and give the floor back.
Hold on. We're going to come back to the subject of inclusion in a second. I want to stay about sort of the areas of risk which have to do with the access, maybe unauthorized access or non-transparent access. I want to ask Teki, sort of the government access to data and the surveillance spheres. Are we making surveillance even more feasible by linking everything to a unique identity number? I mean, do you fear it was a concern before, but now that that the fact is a unique ID number can be attributed to every transaction, especially transactions that you are going to do from a mobile device or from using your digital electronic identity card, etc. Where do we stand with sort of the government surveillance and tracking of people?
There's a real risk, and I mean that risk has always been in existence with mobile technology. Governments are already snooping in on us because there are technologies that enable them to do that currently. Now, linking, and especially seeing the growth that we continue to see in the mobile industry, and if you're looking even at the future where we are going to see mobile companies becoming technology companies, and also, the what we are seeing around mobile IDs and the role of linking, unique identities to SIMs, this risk more increases. And unfortunately, for a lot of our African countries, we are even passing legislations that enable this to happen. We are passing legislations that forces mobile operators to necessarily give access information to government entities without going through proper protocols or laid down structures. And this is a very critical thing. I always like to tell the politicians that, they can get excited about it, but you will not always be in power. Somebody else will come back and use it. And usually they're the ones, they use it in targeting themselves, not necessarily the ordinary person. But this is a real risk. Now, what tends to be happening is that we do not even have adequate transparency measures and checks and balances built into surveillance. Nobody is saying that surveillance shouldn't happen at all. But covert surveillance, mass surveillance by governments of citizens is not the ideal, especially when you have countries that have constitutions, that respect right to communication and privacy. where we have laws that do not just allow, governments to snoop in on citizens, then we are not necessarily doing a lot to protect, citizens. Yes, we understand that the security agencies may at some point need to have access to some of these information for society's own protection. And we like to flag the national security flag every time we're raising these issues of surveillance. We recognize that, but there has to be checks and balances. We have situations in most of our countries where sometimes security agencies can actually request information from mobile network operators without necessarily going to court. And then coming back maybe after 24 hours, reviewing it, as long as they can ask for, let's stop it. After 24 hours, you give it to them and they're given a window before going to court. And yet there is no body after the fact to even look at all these things and review some of these requests to identify where the dangers are to the citizenry. And so that risk is really there. My proposal is that we need to, surveillance will happen to some extent, but we need to build in safeguards. And these safeguards should include oversight. These oversights can include parliamentary, civil society, technology company oversight of some of these requests, as well as the courts and the judges coming in to use the warrant systems in order to give out some of these warrants that enable that.
Okay, so I mean, clearly those type of oversights should be built in national legislation regarding data protection and privacy. Those have to be, and the exclusions for national security have to be really narrowly defined. Hold on, I want to go to Solomon with a couple of two maybe positive developments. One, Solomon, you are aware of the NIMC mobile app for the national ID. And what do you think of the idea of using a mobile app to tokenize your digital NIN, your NIN, so that you don't have to use your NIN in every transaction? You use a token easily and conveniently generated by the mobile app.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Tik. So we are looking at the role of mobile ID in advanced economies generally. And I can tell you categorically, now the use of mobile app is one of the best things that could ever happen to any ID ecosystem. But then what are the challenges? What are the concerns? Should we even have concerns? Of course we should have it. Now, I can tell you, if you go online, there have been reports of hacking of NIMC mobile apps. Now, some of those reports have been debunked by NIMC. Now, but even if those instances never happened, the fact that there were such rumors, it's a likelihood, it's a red flag that such could happen. Because we live in a society where there have been successful hacking of platforms, even government offices and agencies use for their businesses. So for me, I want to submit that it is actually the right step, in the right direction to use mobile app for, organizing hiding. But then I think the government, the coordinating agency now, which is NIMC, needs to go above board to ensure, and win the trust of the people, the right holders, that of course we are going to effectively secure your ID even on this mobile app.
Right, fair enough. But here I'm talking about one specific development, which is the idea of tokenization. Should we be, as civil society, should we be recommending to countries to make tokenization a simple act so that individuals who have a national ID and they're required to provide a number, they're not going to provide the same number every time? Do you support tokenization? And maybe Teki and Nolwazi, just sort of briefly, do you support this as a good development? Clearly, there could be loopholes, there could be errors in its development, but done right, is tokenization an important privacy by design that we should pursue in Africa?
Very well, Dr. Tik. For me, tokenization, it's even a step further, in the game of digital identity. Now, and the truth here is this. For example, I was at a forum yesterday, and quite a number of people in attendance were so worried about the fact that we have duplicity of databases, across the country. I mean, in Nigeria now. So people are asking a question. Why can't I approach a government office, agency, and with a particular token, then my personal data can be accessed, I can enjoy social amenities and services. Now, I can tell you the answers from 99% of Nigerians would be, yes, we want that. But now, in the light of that, now people get worried that with this idea of tokenization, I mean, this is actually the question on the lips of an average citizen, a layman, thinking, with this token, are you sure that my entire life cannot be wiped off, in a second? And that is actually the concern, a legitimate one, a citizen or resident we have, which government has a responsibility to actually assure them. Okay, so basically, it is a double-edged sword, basically, because they don't understand how it's going to work. They don't understand the mechanism, and therefore they are not going to trust it because of lack of understanding. And that's a role for civil society and the transparency that government needs to be in order to win the trust. Hold on that. Teki, speak on transparency. You talked about the access requests that the government's issues to the MNOs. Sort of many MNOs all over the world, and I don't know if it's the practice also in Africa. They publish annual transparency reports showing the total number of data access requests they received from government in a given year and how they dealt with them. Is that the case in Africa? And what is civil society's view on this type of transparency reports?
I think that transparency reports, especially from industry perspectives, is very good to give the public adequate information. A lot of the time in Africa, citizens are kept on the blind side, especially when it comes to government's access requests. But I am yet to see any multinational, the MNOs particularly operating in Africa yet to do that. Interestingly, these MNOs, like I said, they also exist in other parts of the world, and they give out those reports as well. But we are not seeing that happening currently on the continent. In the continent.
And this is disturbing, in fact. This is disturbing because it means that they are applying a different standard. They are issuing reports in other countries where they want to win the trust of the consumer, while in Africa, it seems like they don't care about winning the trust. They don't bother to issue. Or is it because the governments in Africa, maybe they are not really favorable of these reports, because they have been often in developed countries, governments were opposing to these reports, but the court system was strong enough to allow them to stay, so that the government could not have the jurisdiction to say, you're not allowed to issue transparency reports.
I think it's actually both of the reasons that you have attributed. And now one of the things you should also realize that in most of the developed world, they are very rights averse, and the courts, the judiciary, even sometimes the public agencies and governmental agencies are held accountable. And so they also sometimes see some of these transparency reports as a leveraging for them, to say that we're not even doing anything bad. And look here, it's not just my reports. And most of these advanced countries also have requirements sometimes under their laws to equally issue these transparency reports. So it becomes a lot easier easier if the private sector entity also, puts out that report. But we don't have we don't even have laws that actually promote and encourage, the issuing of such reports. And it's very likely that, organizations that are going to flag out, I can see them, falling on the wrong side of the government in power just because of the kind of reports that they will put out.
Okay, since this is the final word and since we are running out of time, I want to give each of you just 1 minute to give a final word. So I start with Nolwazi, then Solomon, then Teki. So give us your final word of wisdom about the future of mobile and what needs to be done to ensure that it does not have a dark side.
I think for me, Dr. Attic, because I really wanted to discuss the data governance aspect because it's very layered. When you're thinking about it, you can start off looking at the principles of identification that was published by the World Bank last year, looking at it in the digital age, and looking at the last pillar of governance because it touches on data protection, cybersecurity that we've covered about Africa, and then looks at institutional mandate and accountability. And that touches on something that's very important, that for MNOs, the identity data collection is not a mandate. So there needs to be data control and make sure that the attesters to that data that they control for consumers are quality testers and that data maintains a high level of quality. And then lastly, to enforce legal frameworks through independent oversight, adjudication of grievances. That's where it's really important to have that independent authority that is independent of the government, so that the government has no influence over it. Therefore, there's consumer recourse on any breaches, cybersecurity attacks, and that they can be held accountable, both the MNO or the government, if there's anything that happens to a consumer's data against their will. Because as a previous speaker spoke, I think in the first one or second session, that you should be able to just show that I'm over 18, so I can drink. That in South Africa, that's 18. And so I think even those considerations come in now. We think about where's the data going to be stored? How's the data going to be used? How is the data going to be shared? And looking at the data accountability partnership, that has key points I touched on earlier. And then looking at the data governance frameworks, which need to be clearly written out and transparent to the public as well, so they know how their data is moving from the mobile network operator to the National Identity Authority. So just to sum it up for me, I think that with all these regulatory frameworks that we're considering and how they should work around and how they should be enforced with the consumer in mind, they need to be also at the same time taught to the consumer in a more palatable way to them, because not everyone can read an act and fully understand what it means, to make sure that we get their buy-in and they can get into get their digital identity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nolwazi, for the final word. Solomon. Did we lose Solomon? I think we lost Solomon while the operator tries to put him back in. Teki?
Yes, I think that I would like to end on the note that it is very important, even without adequate legislative framework, to start actually implementing, to start looking at compliance and enforcement, especially in the implementation of IDs, and especially in the mobile ID space. Now, it does not only enable the MNOs especially gain the confidence of their customers, but it also puts in place credible systems and structures within which this data can be used, especially when, like I say, I can see the future of mobile technology moving to more advanced, state of implementation. our regulators also have to do a lot more. They need to be a lot more up and do it. And my advice there is that there are various sectors. Yes, I know they have limited resources, which sometimes challenges the ability to enforce. But that is also the reason why they have the capabilities of working with all the stakeholders in the space, civil society, industry players, in order to build a formidable compliance framework, whether it has to do with cybersecurity, whether it has to do with data protection, whether it has to do with even electronic transactions and the like. We have the ability together, you know, to be able to put in place an efficient compliance framework when we work together. And so on that note, I would just say that there is the need for a lot more collaboration and cooperation amongst all the key stakeholders, governments, industry players, civil society organizations, even to some extent the regulators, in ensuring that we are able to, you know, protect everybody in this space.
Thanks. Thanks, Teki, for the final word. Solomon, we lost you before, so now we go back to you. Final word.
Yes, thank you. I've always maintained the fact that the governments are the gatekeepers, you know, when it comes to the data protection, privacy, or IP or digital ID ecosystem. But then, you know, while we can understand for some political reasons, while the government may not be alive to their responsibility. So for this moment, I actually want to bring a message to the MNOs and civil society organizations. Now, in its 25 years of existence, MTN had only published its transparency report once, which was in 2020. Now, of course, now, and if you look at that transparency report, now it is very inadequate on many grounds. Now, one, I'm going to give an example. In Nigeria, now MTN actually referenced some pieces of legislation which as a day until date were and are only bills, you know, legislative propositions and not laws. Now, it referenced Data Protection Bill 2019, Digital Rights and Freedom Bill 2019, and of course another bill which is, I think, it was on falsehood and hate speech bill, so to say. That's actually how that bill was characterized in Nigeria. Now, the truth here is this: you cannot actually invalidity of request of the government on mere legislative proposition. They are not laws. They cannot be laws. You cannot cite that. And if you check that 2020 report by MTN, now that is what is contained, you know, as legislative, as legislation that were referenced in that report. That's number one. Number two, I will say that report is also inadequate because it does not even show the positions of MTN, how it pushed back, you know, when government made some improper or illegal data access requests. Now, or should we assume that there were no improper requests? Now, so in that situation, MTN as an MNO in this transparency report left us in dark. Now, then let's go to the civil society. Now, civil society needs to do more and actually engage with MNOs regularly. They can always invite them to summit programs and engage them, you know, through advocacy and some other ways.
Solomon, thank you. Thank you for these insights. Thank you, Teki, and thank you, Nolwazi. I wanna thank the three of you, and I just wanna close with a few words. Operator, could you just prepare the closing? My friends, we've come a long way together. Actually, this has been one of the longest and most exciting sagas that we have done. To prepare it for you, we've interviewed 130 people. We found the best ideas and the brightest. We put them together to tell a story which started from basically the pro-poor perspective, then the development context, towards the growth and towards the future. Today, we've seen glimpses of the future. They are bright, but there are potential dark sides that could blemish the future if they are not done and treated correctly, especially in Africa, where the lack of maturity of the regulatory frameworks and the legislative frameworks continue to raise concerns. And so we at ID for Africa are committed to a bright future, and we're committed to ensuring that it will continue to be well lit, and those dark sides will not be brushed aside. We are going to attack them head on, and we're going to accompany you to work all through to find a way through partnerships with civil society, government agencies, regulators, and industry and development agencies to make sure that the fruits of digital identity, mobile identity, and legal identity are actually available to everyone, so that no one is left behind as they leverage their right as a human being to have an identity and to live in dignity compatible with what all of us are enjoying. So with that, I'm been honored to have worked with so many of these wonderful people. There've actually been over 45 people in this saga. I've learned a lot from them. I hope you did too. This saga, 4 episodes, is now available to all of you. And now we look forward to the next phase of our engagement with you, which is our augmented general meeting, which will take place in Marrakesh. And there's a different kind of dynamic that's going to take place, fueled by physical presence, fueled by the interactions and collaborations and discussions, and just the temperature of human to human interactions that brings in passion, that I'm hoping will advance our agenda and will make progress towards achieving identity for all. We are not going to stop seeing you on the live cast. We'll be back. Episode 31 will actually be from the event floor, as I had mentioned. And then after that, we'll be coming back on the 28th and the 30th to do a general summation of all the lessons that we've learned from the workshops at the augmented general meeting. When we say augmented, we really mean augmented. That means our interaction is ongoing. Our interaction is actionable. Our interaction is basically leverages both the physical and the virtual mediums to deliver a total experience, to assist you in your strategic capacity building and the knowledge exchange. So with that in mind, I close this session by thanking everybody who's been with us. And I say I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible in the physical meeting. And for the rest, I will continue to see you on the live cast. So thank you very much and be safe.